Chapter 1764. The power of the Chaos Ring was so great that it had created a spatial storm. She had then turned into Bailey Hongzhuang. All of this had been caused by the Chaos Ring. As for why it had chosen Bailey Hongzhuang, it was probably because they had coincidentally bumped into Bailey Hongzhuang at that time. Sometimes, she felt that all of this had been predestined. After all, their names were exactly the same. This coincidence was far too rare. Hearing Bailey Hongzhuang's explanation, Di Beichun finally understood. After his wife had fallen, her soul had directly entered Bailey Hongzhuang's body. That was how all of this had happened. After I entered Bailey Hongzhuang's body, I had also merged with her memories. Therefore, I can only say that the current me is a combination of my past life and Bailey Hongzhuang's. Her soul had long been merged with the memories of these two lives. Therefore, both of them were her, but not completely her. Di Beichun was a little stunned. This news was far too shocking. He simply could not believe that something like this had actually happened. Bailey Hongzhuang stared at Di Beichun. When she saw that Di Beichun had been staring at her in a daze without any reaction, her clear eyes could not help but fill with a trace of worry. She did not know if Di Beichun could accept all of this. She had been very conflicted before she had brought up this matter. Anyone who had heard of this matter would find it hard to believe. Even though this matter was very hard to believe, Di Beichun had quickly digested it and understood it. Di Beichun raised his eyes and saw the worry in Bailey Hongzhuang's clear eyes. He immediately pulled Bailey Hongzhuang into his arms. Her worry made his heart ache. He had never wanted Hongzhuang to feel anxious because of him. Suddenly being pulled into Di Beichun's arms, Bailey Hongzhuang was slightly stunned. The worry in her eyes gradually wavered. Di Beichun gently patted Bailey Hongzhuang's back. His warm and mellow voice rang in Bailey Hongzhuang's ears. "My wife, no matter who you are, no matter if you're from 1,000 years ago or 1,000 years later, to me, you're still my wife. Your identity will not change anything." His warm and magnetic voice seemed to have a mysterious power, inexplicably calming Bailey Hongzhuang's heart. Di Beichun's words put her heart down again, and Bailey Hongzhuang's lips could not help but raise a happy smile. Her judgment was not wrong. Di Beichun would not care about these things. Even if Di Beichun knew the truth, it would not affect anything. As Di Beichun stroked Bailey Hongzhuang's back, he suddenly thought of something. His eyes could not help but turn gloomy. Sensing Di Beichun's strange behavior, Bailey Hongzhuang could not help but withdraw from his arms and look at Di Beichun. Di Beichun's face was as gloomy as water. His eyes, which were as deep as the sea, were now covered with dark clouds. His eyes were unreadable, making it impossible for anyone to see through his thoughts. Bailey Hongzhuang stared at Di Beichun and could not help but feel worried. "Beichun, what's wrong with you? Does she still care about this after all?" Di Beichun's hands suddenly grabbed Bailey Hongzhuang's shoulders. His eyes, which were as attractive as black holes, were fixed on Bailey Hongzhuang. "My wife, you weren't married in the past, were you?" Chapter 1765. Looking at Di Beichun's nervous and perturbed look, Bailey Hongzhuang's heart, which had been hanging in the air again, calmed down. She felt that it was very funny. When she saw Di Beichun's dignified look earlier, she thought that it was something important. She did not expect that Di Beichun was actually thinking about her marriage. This man's concern was not the main point at all. Bailey Hongzhuang raised her eyebrows and looked at Di Beichun. A sly look quietly appeared in her eyes. Usually, when Di Beichun teased her, she could not resist at all. Now, she finally had a chance to tease Di Beichun. "If I say, I was married in the past, what will you do?" Bailey Hongzhuang looked a little nervous. She looked at Di Beichun worriedly, as if it was difficult for her to speak. As soon as she said that, Di Beichun's face suddenly darkened. His eyes were even more oppressive and cold. Time seemed to have suddenly frozen. Only the sound of Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichun's breathing could be heard in the room. It was indescribably oppressive. Di Beichun did not care about who Hongzhuang was in the past. The only thing he cared about was whether Hongzhuang had someone else in her heart. However, now that he knew that Hongzhuang was married in the past, Didn't this mean that Hong Zhuang also had a man she loved deeply in the past? At the thought of this, Di Beichen could not help but tighten his grip on Bailey Hong Zhuang's arm. He never thought that something like this would happen. He only felt a stuffy feeling in his heart, which made him panic. No matter how serious his injuries were, he had never felt so uncomfortable. Bailey Hong Zhuang felt a pain coming from her arm. Di Beichen had used too much strength. She only wanted to make a joke, but after seeing Di Beichen's dignified expression, she felt that her joke seemed to have gone too far. The corners of Bailey Hong Zhuang's lips slowly spread into a smile. Her eyes were bright and full of color, blooming like stars in the sky. "Beichen, are you jealous?" Looking at the smile on Bailey Hong Zhuang's face, especially after seeing the sly look in Bailey Hong Zhuang's eyes, how could Di Beichen, who was smart, not know that Hong Zhuang did it on purpose? "Wife, are you lying to me?" Di Beichen raised his voice. What Hong Zhuang had just said really shocked him. This unexpected situation happened too suddenly, completely out of her expectations. For a moment, he did not know what to do. He only felt a wave of pain. However, Hong Zhuang was only teasing him. At the thought of this, Di Beichen's eyes became increasingly gloomy. His wife was becoming more and more disobedient. She actually dared to lie to him about this kind of thing. Bailey Hong Zhuang could not help but chuckle. When she saw Di Beichen's face, which was as black as the bottom of a pot, she found it even more hilarious. "Beichen, you're too cute, haha." She had never seen Di Beichen like this. It was simply too amusing. However, at the same time, Bailey Hong Zhuang was deeply moved. Di Beichen did not care about anything else. The only thing he cared about was her feelings. This was really touching. However, when Di Beichen saw Bailey Hong Zhuang's smiling face, he only felt that it was time to discipline Hong Zhuang. She actually dared to lie to him about this kind of thing. In the next moment, Di Beichen exerted force with both hands and carried Bailey Hong Zhuang to sit on his lap. Chapter 1766. The atmosphere became ambiguous in an instant. Bailey Hong Zhuang's white face was instantly covered with a blush. The position in front of her was too ambiguous. The next moment, Bailey Hong Zhuang immediately wanted to go down, but Di Beichen's broad palm had been holding her slender waist. The strong and overbearing force did not allow her to leave. Di Beichen looked at Bailey Hong Zhuang in front of him with a deep and penetrating gaze. His wife was getting more and more naughty. She even dared to make such a joke with him. He had to properly punish his wife. Bailey Hong Zhuang looked at Di Beichen angrily. He was really bad. Knowing that she had no way to deal with such a situation, he deliberately used such a way to punish her. "Let me down." Bailey Hong Zhuang struggled. This kind of situation made her feel at a loss. Although she was extremely close to Di Beichen, this was the first time they were in such an ambiguous position. They were so close, separated only by a thin cloth. Faintly, she could feel the heat from Di Beichen, which made her feel helpless. Di Beichen originally just wanted to tease Bailey Hong Zhuang, but after seeing Bailey Hong Zhuang's shy and helpless appearance, the desire in his heart immediately jumped up. At this moment, coupled with the constant twisting, he only felt that his body was about to explode. His wife was simply igniting fire everywhere. Di Beichen grabbed Bailey Hong Zhuang's small hand and said, "Wife, if you continue to move like this, I can't guarantee what will happen next." When he opened his mouth, there was a hint of hoarseness. Di Beichen's eyes were instantly dyed with the light of desire. His eyes were blurred and domineering as he looked at Bailey Hong Zhuang. Last time, they were disturbed by Xia Jiqing and the others, but now it was only them. Listening to Di Beichen's words, Bailey Hong Zhuang immediately understood the meaning of Di Beichen and immediately did not dare to move. Because she also felt that there was a change in Di Beichen's body. Di Beichen looked at Bailey Hong Zhuang, who was smiling proudly and became an obedient kitten in a short time, and his lips could not help but raise a smile. "Wife, do you dare to tease me in the future?" Bailey Hong Zhuang's face was so red that it could drip water. At this moment, when she saw Di Beichen's teasing look, she could not help but feel ashamed. Damn Di Beichun. Every time, I was defeated by his hands. Seeing Bailey Hongzhuang pursing her lips and looking unwilling, Di Beichun's eyes gradually deepened. He raised his eyebrows and said, "It seems that the wife is still unwilling to admit defeat." The next moment, Di Beichun's figure suddenly moved. In the blink of an eye, Di Beichun had already carried Bailey Hongzhuang to the bed. At this moment, their posture was more ambiguous than before. Bailey Hongzhuang looked at Di Beichun with shame. At this moment, Di Beichun was already on top of her, and her legs were still separated. Di Beichun leaned forward, and the hot part was so close to her that she could not help but shiver. Although the last time she and Di Beichun had been in a state of delirium, after all, they had not reached this step. At this moment, when she was really in this situation, she knew how embarrassing it was. She only felt that her mind was blank, and she stared at Di Beichun, not knowing what to say. Chapter 1767. Looking at Bailey Hongzhuang like this, Di Beichun could not hold back the excitement in his heart. He immediately kissed Bailey Hongzhuang's red lips. Her soft red lips were filled with an enchanting fragrance. Once he kissed her, he would be intoxicated. Di Beichun's kiss was wild and hot, with a trace of dominance and possessiveness. He searched for Bailey Hongzhuang's body and played with it. He was glad. He was glad that his wife had transmigrated into Bailey Hongzhuang's body. If not for that, everything that happened later would not have happened. His heart would still be so empty. There would not be a ray of warm sunlight shining on his heart like Hongzhuang. He was even more glad that his wife had not married in her previous life. There was no one else in her heart. Otherwise, it would be too difficult to completely defeat the person from 1,000 years ago in his wife's heart. Thinking of all these, Di Beichun wanted Bailey Hongzhuang even more. He wanted her. He wanted her crazily. Even though she was by his side now, he still felt a sense of crisis in his heart. The equally outstanding Mo Yunjue was watching covetously from the side. For Hongzhuang's matter, Mo Yunjue was also giving his all. He did not mention this problem, but it did not mean that he was not worried. Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes were blurred. From the initial embarrassment to Di Beichun's kiss, the ambiguous atmosphere was spreading. Her body temperature was also rising. She responded to Di Beichun with a jerky but passionate response. From Di Beichun's kiss, she keenly felt a trace of worry and uneasiness. She did not know what had caused Di Beichun's uneasiness. To her, she only wanted Di Beichun to feel at ease. Feeling Bailey Hongzhuang's response, Di Beichun's kiss became more intense. From her red lips to Di Beichun's slender white neck. His warm breath sprayed on Bailey Hongzhuang's neck. She only felt her body go limp, as if she had no strength in her body. Fine and dense kisses fell on Bailey Hongzhuang's body. Di Beichun's breathing became more rapid and heavy. His hands slowly reached into Bailey Hongzhuang's clothes. Feeling the delicate and tender skin, Bailey Hongzhuang's body ignited everywhere. Bailey Hongzhuang's little face flushed red. She could only let Di Beichun do what he wanted, but she did not know what to do. Di Beichun's hands seemed to have magic. Wherever his hands touched, the skin would emit an astonishing heat. Di Beichun only felt that every inch of Bailey Hongzhuang's skin had a fatal attraction to him. For so many years, he had been surrounded by many women, but none of them had ever moved his heart. Furthermore, he had always been a chaste person. Therefore, no woman had ever appeared by his side. There was only one woman that he could not restrain himself from, and that was his wife. 2 years ago, he had not been so thirsty. After not seeing Hongzhuang for 2 years, he felt that he could not restrain himself anymore. Just as Bailey Hongzhuang was at a loss of what to do, Di Beichun held Bailey Hongzhuang's little hand and put it into his clothes. When she touched Di Beichun's strong and smooth skin, Bailey Hongzhuang found that Di Beichun's body temperature was even hotter than hers. It was as if a flame was burning her palm. As Bailey Hongzhuang's soft and boneless little hand covered his chest, Di Beichun only felt that he had touched a piece of ice in the flame. He felt very comfortable. Chapter 1768. In the next moment, Di Beichun directly grabbed Bailey Hongzhuang's small hand and felt his scalding heat. When Bailey Hongzhuang realized what she was touching, she only felt a bang in her mind, and then there was only a blank space left. Although she didn't know much about the matters between men and women, she knew what this was. Following the touch of Bailey Hongzhuang's small hand, Di Beichun only felt that he was about to explode. This feeling was really killing him. Bailey Hongzhuang couldn't help but close her eyes. Her face was so red that it was about to drip blood. She immediately tried to pull her hand away. Di Beichun had already guessed Bailey Hongzhuang's thoughts. How could he allow her to pull her hand away? He held on tightly to Bailey Hongzhuang's hand, not allowing her to retreat even an inch. Beichun. Bailey Hongzhuang couldn't help but call out softly. This situation was really too embarrassing. Di Beichun raised his eyes that were filled with lust. Those reddened eyes and the beads of sweat on his forehead showed that he was having a hard time holding himself back. Seeing Di Beichun like this, Bailey Hongzhuang's original words were stuck in her mouth, and she didn't say anything. The moment Di Beichun's hand touched Bailey Hongzhuang's leg, Bailey Hongzhuang couldn't help but tremble. That limp and numb feeling made her moan uncontrollably. And it was this sound that made Di Beichun, who was already unable to hold himself back, completely ignited. He reached his hand into Bailey Hongzhuang's skirt. He only felt that everything on his body was unnecessary. Beichun, I guess that you were in the cultivation room. I heard that you had already brought your precious wife back from the assessment. But it's been so long. Why didn't you let me see her? Isn't that too much? A carefree and sunny voice sounded from above the training room, followed by a series of movements. Hearing this sudden voice, Bailey Hongzhuang couldn't help but be surprised. She never thought that someone would appear at this time. From the looks of it, the other party seemed to be very familiar with this cultivation room. Judging from the commotion, it was clear that he was about to enter the cultivation room. Damn it! Di Beichun's voice was hoarse as he slammed his fist onto the edge of the bed. This guy just had to come at this time. She had disturbed him. Bailey Hongzhuang could not help but look at her and Di Beichun's disheveled and messy appearance. The other party was clearly coming down directly. What should they do if they saw him? Thinking of this, Bailey Hongzhuang immediately pushed Di Beichun. Her moist and blurry eyes were filled with nervousness and panic. What should we do? She had never encountered such a situation before and could not help but feel flustered. Di Beichun glanced at Bailey Hongzhuang and said, "When Ziren, I dare you to come down here right now." When Ziren was just about to enter the cultivation room in high spirits, when he suddenly heard Di Beichun shout, he could not help but be stunned for a moment. All along, Di Beichun's personality had been rather good. It was rare to see him so furious. Could it be that he had been dumped by his precious wife? Although when Ziren didn't quite understand, he still stopped himself from going downstairs. He and Di Beichun had been good friends for many years. Their masters were good friends as well. Hence, they had often cultivated together when they were young. Chapter 1769. Among the peers, he was the one who knew Di Beichun the best. Although everyone believed that Han Xiling and Di Beichun were a couple, as a good brother of Di Beichun, he knew very well that Di Beichun had no romantic feelings for Han Xiling. At the beginning, he also felt that Di Beichun was very strange. He was obviously very outstanding, and there were many outstanding women in Tiangang sect, but Di Beichun didn't like any of them. Until 2 years ago, when he learned from Di Beichun that Di Beichun already had a wife, he couldn't help but be stunned. He had known Di Beichun for so many years, and he had never seen Di Beichun fall in love with any woman. He even felt that if this continued, Di Beichun was likely to die alone. However, just when he didn't pay attention, Di Beichun had already married someone. This news was simply too shocking. However, as he and Di Beichun had an in-depth conversation, he found that Di Beichun was really trapped this time. As a good brother of Di Beichun, he naturally understood how his good brother's vision was. Therefore, he had always wanted to see Di Beichun's baby wife. At the beginning, this guy said that he would let him see after Bailey Hongzhuang was brought back, but he waited for so long without any movement, so he came to Tiangang's sect. He was very familiar with Tiangang's sect, and he was even more familiar with Di Beichen's palace. As long as this guy wasn't in his own room, he must be in the cultivation room, so he came without hesitation. However, why did this guy suddenly lose his temper at him now? After seeing that there was no movement upstairs, Bailey Hongzhuang was relieved. If someone saw her like this now, then she really had no face to see anyone. Di Beichen's face was gloomy and scary. Did this group of damn guys specially choose the time every time? Appearing at this critical moment, he was so depressed that he wanted to hit someone. Looking at the gloomy face of Bailey Hongzhuang, the originally flustered and nervous Bailey Hongzhuang suddenly couldn't help but laugh. Thinking about it, the most depressed person was Di Beichen. Previously, Di Beichen was out of control in order to punish her. She didn't expect that the person who was punished in the end was Di Beichen. Noticing that Bailey Hongzhuang's lips couldn't help but overflow a smile, Di Beichen's eyes, his wife was still in the mood to laugh now. Get up quickly. If you wait too long, others will be suspicious. Bailey Hongzhuang said. She didn't know who the other party was, but since the other party knew about the existence of the cultivation room, he must be very familiar with it. Who cares what he thinks? Di Beichen didn't care about this at all. Just looking at his little girl's complacent appearance, his heart felt stifled. In the next moment, Di Beichen once again covered Bailey Hongzhuang's body. Seeing Di Beichen's actions, Bailey Hongzhuang couldn't help but panic. Now that the situation was like this, Beichen wouldn't continue, right? Thinking that there was another person above who could come down at any time, she couldn't help but feel anxious. Seeing that you're so proud, I'll give you a punishment. Di Beichen's hoarse and hot voice sounded in Bailey Hongzhuang's ears. Then, Bailey Hongzhuang felt a numbing sensation on her neck. Di Beichen directly pecked her. He had to let his wife know that it wouldn't be so easy to tease him in the future. Chapter 1770. My dear wife, this is punishment. Di Beichen smiled faintly, but the lust in his eyes had yet to dissipate. He was going to have a good spar with Xiren later. Otherwise, how was he going to vent his anger that had transformed from lust? Looking at Di Beichen's smirk, Bailey Hongzhuang understood what had happened. You scoundrel! Bailey Hongzhuang cried out angrily. Her little face was filled with shame and anger. She stretched out her little fist and was about to hit Di Beichen. It was the cool season now, and the dress she was wearing was very thin. Her neck was completely exposed. Di Beichen had left a mark on her neck. How was she going to face anyone? These words coming out of Bailey Hongzhuang's mouth did not sound disgusted at all. On the contrary, it sounded more like a spoiled child. Di Beichen immediately grabbed Bailey Hongzhuang's soft and seemingly boneless little hand. His body moved closer to her, and he whispered into her ear, "Today, an untactful fellow has disturbed us. I promise that next time, I will not allow such an untactful fellow to appear." Once these words were spoken, Bailey Hongzhuang immediately understood the meaning behind Di Beichen's words. Her little face, which was already flushed red, was now filled with a blood-red hue. Di Beichen's words meant that next time, tidy yourself up properly. You can't let that fellow's eyes take advantage of you. Di Beichen's face was gloomy. Obviously, the matter of being disturbed at such a crucial moment was not something that could be easily forgotten. Bailey Hongzhuang saw how petty Di Beichen was, and the corners of her lips could not help but curl into a smile. Even though Di Beichen was so naughty that she could not stand up to him, at a time like this, he was really cute. While Bailey Hongzhuang was tidying up her clothes, Di Beichen began to circulate his cultivation method. If he did not do this, he would not be able to suppress his lust at all. However, the lust that had been suppressed for so long was obviously not something that could be eliminated so easily. He could only circulate his cultivation method over and over again. After Bailey Hongzhuang tidied herself up, she could not help but take out a mirror. She saw a bright red mark on her neck, which was extremely eye-catching. Bailey Hongzhuang tried to use her hair to cover it. However, this position could only cover a small part of it. The slightest movement would expose it. Di Beichen did this on purpose. Bailey Hongzhuang was indignant. She didn't know when this imprint would disappear. It seems that she could only stay in the house for a while and not go out. Not long after Di Beichen calmed down, he and Bailey Hongzhuang walked out of the cultivation room together. When Ziren was bored to death in the room, he did not understand what Di Beichen was doing and why he had not come up after so long. Under such circumstances, he could not resist the idea of opening the mechanism and walking into the cultivation room. Just as Ziren was about to enter the cultivation room, Di Beichen finally walked out. Seeing Di Beichen appear, Ziren could not help but ask, "Beichen, what are you doing in the cultivation room? Why did you take so long to come up?" Just as he finished speaking, when Ziren saw a beautiful and refined woman appear behind Di Beichen. Suddenly, when Ziren's attention fell on Bailey Hongzhuang, he had already heard that Di Beichen's wife was as beautiful as a fairy. He had always been curious. He did not know what kind of beauty can make Di Beichen so proud. Chapter 1771. When Ziren could not help but recall Di Beichen's angry voice from before. Could it be that his appearance had coincidentally disturbed Di Beichen's good time? At the thought of this, when Ziren's probing gaze could not help but shift back and forth between Di Beichen and Bailey Hongzhuang. Feeling Ziren's ambiguous gaze, Bailey Hongzhuang could not help but feel a little guilty. Recalling everything that happened in the cultivation room earlier, she felt her face blush and her heart beat faster. When Bailey Hongzhuang's head was slightly lowered, when Ziren immediately saw the mark on Bailey Hongzhuang's neck. Immediately, the smile in his eyes became even more complacent. He and Di Beichen had been good friends for so many years, but he had never seen Di Beichen so furious. He did not intentionally disturb them. Who asked Di Beichen to be so indecent in broad daylight? Noticing Ziren's smiling eyes, Bailey Hongzhuang felt as if when Ziren had seen through everything from before. "What are you looking at?" Di Beichen's face was calm, and his voice was slightly cold. When Ziren sized up Di Beichen and smiled, "Looking at your dissatisfied expression, could it be that I've disturbed your good time, and that's why you're so angry?" Following when Ziren's words, Bailey Hongzhuang could not help but cough. Who was this man in front of her? He really dared to say anything. She knew that he had seen through everything. Di Beichen's face darkened even more. When Ziren, "I've recently learned a new martial technique. Come with me to the training field and we'll exchange pointers." Once these words came out, Ziren's face could not help but change. He hurriedly said, "Di Beichen, you know that you're stronger than me. I've long stopped exchanging pointers with you." Di Beichen's talent in cultivation had always been enviable. Although he did not work as hard as Di Beichen in cultivation, to be honest, if they were to really fight, he really would not be a match for Di Beichen. "You know that you won't exchange pointers with me, and yet you dare to disturb my good time. Today, I must exchange pointers with you properly to practice." Di Beichen calmly walked out. He was almost depressed to death. The last time he was disturbed by Xia Jiqing and the others at the Kanglan College. This time he thought that there would be no such problem in his own palace. Who would have thought that a damn when Ziren would come out again? This guy did not appear earlier or later. He just had to appear at the most terrible time. Now, he even dared to make fun of him? Bailey Hongzhuang stared at Di Beichen and Wen Ziren. These two men were so blunt when they spoke. Since when was this kind of thing allowed to be said out in the open? Even if Ziren had seen through them before, as long as they did not admit it, they could at least be perfunctory. Now that Di Beichen said this, wasn't that admitting it? Bailey Hongzhuang only felt a burst of heat on her face. She was so embarrassed that she did not know how to face people. Seeing Di Beichen's serious look when Ziren also had a bitter face, he could not help but look at Bailey Hongzhuang. "Miss Bailey, it seems that Di Beichen is serious now. If I can't hold on for a while, you must help me." Bailey Hongzhuang looked at Wen Ziren, who had a sad look on his face. Her expression was a bit embarrassed, and she did not know how to answer. Obviously, Ziren knew her and Di Beichen very well. Looking at this posture, he should be a good friend of Di Beichen. Chapter 1772. After seeing Bailey Hongzhuang nod in agreement, when Xiren let out a sigh of relief and followed Di Beichen out. This guy is still a virgin, even after holding it in for more than 10 years. Now that he finally had a chance, I messed it up. A man who is not satisfied with his desires, it can be very scary when he releases his anger. Sigh. I didn't check the almanac when I went out today. I have to be careful next time. Bailey Hongzhuang was speechless. When Xiren's words really made her speechless. Not satisfied with his desires? Virgin? Bailey Hongzhuang was confused. Where did Di Beichen get such a blabbermouth friend? Stop being so long-winded. Di Beichen's angry voice came from the front. Xiren also hurriedly followed. Bailey Hongzhuang saw this, and after thinking for a moment, she also followed. Until now, she didn't have many opportunities to see Di Beichen fight. If she could see Di Beichen and Xiren fight today, it would be a very good thing. At the back of Di Beichen's palace, there was a training field. This was the place where he usually practiced his martial arts. After Di Beichen stood in the middle of the training field, his gaze fell on Xiren. Come, let's compare notes. Looking at Di Beichen's cold and gloomy face, when Xiren knew that he wouldn't have a good time. Beichen, let's talk things out. A gentleman uses his mouth and not his fists. Your precious wife is still here. Aren't you afraid that your selfish desire to make a move on a good friend of many years will make her change her view of you? As he spoke, Xiren signaled to Di Beichen that Bailey Hongzhuang was not far away. Di Beichen glanced at Bailey Hongzhuang, then looked at Xiren with eyes full of anger. My wife must also think that you are very annoying. I am helping her vent her anger. Bailey Hongzhuang had just arrived at the training field when she heard Di Beichen's words. She couldn't help but look at Di Beichen with shame and anger. Di Beichen was said to be unsatisfied, but now that he said this, didn't it mean that she was also unsatisfied? When Xiren was slightly stunned and couldn't help but look at Bailey Hongzhuang. Absence makes the heart grow fonder. Besides, it's been 2 years. I understand. Bailey Hongzhuang only felt that it was a mistake for her to come here. Di Beichen didn't waste time talking nonsense with Xiren. He raised his right hand, and a sharp sword appeared. He immediately attacked when Xiren. Seeing this, Xiren also took out his own weapon. It had been a long time since he had sparred with Di Beichen. Now that he had the chance to spar, it was good. Vigorous elemental energy exploded in an instant. Both of them were in the green realm. If Bailey Hongzhuang was not wrong, they should be in the 5th level of the green realm. Di Beichen and Xiren were able to reach the 5th level of the green realm at such a young age. It was obvious that both of them were extremely talented in cultivation. As the young master of the Tiangang sect, Di Beichen's outstanding strength was very shocking. Bailey Hongzhuang thought to herself that when Xiren might be the successor of some sect. After all, the saying birds of a feather flock together made sense. Those who could become good brothers with the successor of a sect might very well be of the same status. The Green Realm cultivators were extremely powerful. The moment the two of them made a move, just the surging origin energy alone was enough to make one's heart tremble. In the next moment, the two figures, one gold and one blue, quickly collided. Ding, ding, ding. Chapter 1773. It was as if there were 2 gusts of wind whistling in front of his eyes. Fierce and biting cold origin energy poured out in torrents, shooting out traces in the ground. Bailey Hongzhuang was a distance away from the two of them. The stronger the cultivation, the wider the range of impact. Not to mention that the two of them had similar cultivation, so it was naturally impossible to determine who was superior in a short period of time. Although the two of them fought like a raging fire, it was impossible to determine the final result for a while. However, with Bailey Hongzhuang's eyesight, she was able to determine that the one who had the upper hand in the end was still Di Beichen. After confirming that Di Beichen would obtain the final victory, Bailey Hongzhuang leisurely waited at the side for the final result. This when Xiren was so outspoken, it was good for Di Beichen to teach him a lesson. Bailey Hongzhuang thought naughtily. The sounds of fighting coming from Di Beichen's palace did not cause an uproar in Tiangang sect, because the young sect master's palace would occasionally have such battle waves. Cloud Sword Sect's young sect master came to find our young sect master again. Their relationship is really good. Cloud Sword Sect's young sect master and our young sect master have been good friends since young. In addition, Tiangang sect and Cloud Sword sect have always been on good terms, so it's normal for their relationship to be so good. In the future, when young sect master and Cloud Sword sect's young sect master both become sect masters, I presume our relationship with Cloud Sword sect will be even closer. Di Beichen and Wen Xiren were good brothers who had played together since young. Any cultivator who had stayed in Tiangang sect for a period of time would know. Di Beichen, didn't we agree not to hit people's faces? Hey, stop. Even if I interrupted your good deed, you wouldn't go so far as to treat me like this, right? You're also choosing a lover over a friend. You and I have been friends for more than 10 years. Wen Xiren kept begging for mercy, but Di Beichen did not care at all. At this moment, both of their weapons had already been put aside. Wen Xiren's neck was clamped by Di Beichen's left hand, and his fist was facing Wen Xiren's face. He knew that this guy cared the most about his face. In order to let this guy remember, he would hit his face. Sister-in-law, come help me. Seeing Di Beichen, Wen Xiren hurriedly, come. Bailey Hongzhuang also came to Di Beichen and Wen Xiren's side. Previously, the two of them were fighting fiercely. She did not expect them to become so noisy now. It was really interesting, even though it was her first time meeting Xiren. But from the interaction between Xiren and Di Beichen, she knew that the two of them had a very good relationship. She did not know Di Beichen's friend before. Today, she finally met one of them. She was very happy. Sister-in-law. After hearing Xiren's name, Di Beichen could not help but narrow his eyes. You're really... In fact, Xiren and Di Beichen have been arguing about who was the older brother and who was the younger brother since they were young. The two of them were the same age, and there was not much of a difference in months. When Xiren's birthday was naturally known, but Di Beichen's birthday... When CTN brought Di Beichen back, he only saw his age, but did not know the specific time. It was because of this that the two of them had been arguing about who was the older brother since they were young. Until now, they had not been able to compete. Ouch. Chapter 1774. Only to see Wen Xiren with two panda eyes. Where was the elegant appearance from before? Bailey Hongzhuang couldn't help but look at Di Beichen. He did it on purpose. Di Beichen whispered in Bailey Hongzhuang's ear, who asked him to disturb my good thing. Obviously, Di Beichen had a huge grudge towards this matter. Bailey Hongzhuang's pretty face flushed red, but at the same time, she felt it was extremely funny. She was a man, and when she saw Di Beichen being so petty, it just had to be on this kind of matter. Xiren looked at Di Beichen and Bailey Hongzhuang flirting, and the resentment in his eyes couldn't help but deepen. You two are really unrestrained. Was it easy for him? Wasn't he just curious about how Di Beichen's precious wife looked like? So he specially came to take a look? Who would have thought that the timing was so unlucky? Di Beichen swept a glance at Xiren, then said to Bailey Hongzhuang, Wife, this is Cloud Sword Sect's young sect leader, Wen Xiren. Hearing that, Bailey Hongzhuang revealed an expression of understanding. Looks like her judgment was indeed correct. This man was similarly the young sect leader of a sect. Cloud Sword Sect was one of the top 10 sects, and cultivators mainly cultivated swords. This point, at that time during the assessment competition, Elder Gu had once introduced it, and she also remembered it clearly. Young sect leader 1. Bailey Hongzhuang spoke out. Hearing Bailey Hongzhuang's address, when Xiren waved his hand and said, Your Beichen's wife, we'll all be good friends in the future, so there's no need to be so polite, just directly call me by my name. Bailey Hongzhuang was slightly stunned. She couldn't help but look at Di Beichen. Di Beichen smiled and said, This guy will come to Tiangang sect from time to time. There will be many opportunities to meet in the future. Just call him Xiren. Bailey Hongzhuang nodded slightly. All right, then I'll call you Xiren. When Xiren acted like they were close friends. Then I'll call you Hongzhuang from now on. All right. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled faintly. Although this was her first time meeting Xiren, she had a very good impression of Xiren. Just from the previous contact, she could tell that Xiren was a very easy person to get along with. Why did you come to Tiangang's sect again today? After beating up Xiren, Di Beichen's mood was obviously much better, so he immediately asked, "Didn't I say it before? I'm here to meet your precious wife." When Xiren looked at Bailey Hongzhuang and then at Di Beichen, "Now that you've met her, she's really compatible with you." However, Di Beichen didn't believe Xiren. "I've known you for so many years. How can I not know what you're thinking? This is at most part of the reason. Did you have a fight with Ying? He and when Xiren had been friends for many years, so he knew when Xiren's affairs very well. Although Xiren was very curious to see Hong Zhuang before, this kind of thing would happen sooner or later, when Xiren wouldn't make a special trip. Usually, there was only one reason that could make Xiren come so far to find him, Shangguan Yingying. Seeing that Di Beichen had seen through everything, when Xiren couldn't help but sigh. A little fight, no problem. Sure enough, Di Beichen's lips raised a faint smile. He watched Xiren and Shangguan Yingying walk over step by step. These two people were really a pair of enemies. Bailey Hongzhuang curiously looked at Xiren and Di Beichen. Obviously, Yingying was a very important person. Chapter 1775. In my opinion, it won't be long before Yingying appears in Tiangang's sect. Di Beichen smiled faintly. Whether it was when Xiren or Shangguan Yingying, he knew them very well. When the two of them got along together, it wouldn't be long before they quarreled. However, the speed at which they reconciled was equally astonishing. Now, he was already used to it. This was the way the two of them got along. When Xiren raised his eyebrows and didn't speak, "The two of you are really interesting. Every time you quarrel, you come to me. You treat my Tiangang sect as a refuge." Di Beichen looked at when Xiren helplessly. He had no intention of getting involved in these things. However, every time something happened between the two of them, they would come to Tiangang's sect. When they were not married, the two of them also came to him when they quarreled. Now after they were married, they still came to him when they quarreled. He was really helpless. Looking at Di Beichen's helpless look, when Xiren couldn't help but say, "In the future, when you and Hong Zhuang quarrel and come to me, I will take you in." Hearing this, Di Beichen directly held Bailey Hongzhuang with one hand and raised his long eyebrows. "My wife and I will not be like you." When Xiren looked at such a proud Di Beichen and was completely speechless. Was this still the Di Beichen he knew before? The Di Beichen he knew before was never like this. He couldn't help but sigh. Sure enough, after a man had a wife, he would change his face. Bailey Hongzhuang couldn't help laughing. The conversation between the two men was also very funny. This was the affection that grew up together. No matter how the other party ridiculed and sarcastic, it still couldn't hurt the affection between them. "You'd better stay in your own room. When Yingying comes, you solve it yourself." Di Beichen glanced at when Xiren indifferently. On this issue, he really couldn't help. When Xiren pondered for a moment when he heard this, and then he could only sigh. He understood that Di Beichen had no idea how to deal with this. When Xiren was obviously not in a good mood. After messing around for a while, he went back to his room to rest. Di Beichen and Bailey Hongzhuang also went back to the cultivation room together. At this moment, after entering the cultivation room, Bailey Hongzhuang couldn't help but think of the charming scene from before, and two red clouds once again appeared on her face. After Di Beichen noticed Bailey Hongzhuang's rosy face, he couldn't help but smile. "Wife, what are you thinking about?" "No, nothing." Under Di Beichen's pair of eyes that could see through people's hearts, Bailey Hongzhuang only felt that she had nowhere to hide. "How about we continue what we didn't finish just now?" Di Beichen looked at Bailey Hongzhuang teasingly. His tone was very ambiguous. Seeing this, Bailey Hongzhuang couldn't help but reach out and hit Di Beichen. "You're shameless. Xiren is not far away. As long as we don't look for him now, he won't dare to disturb us." Di Beichen approached Bailey Hongzhuang. His smile was full of ambiguity and teasing. Bailey Hongzhuang knew that she was no match for Di Beichen in this aspect, so she didn't continue to stay on this topic. "Who is Yingying?" Bailey Hongzhuang asked. "Shangguan Yingying. She is Xiren's wife. The two of them are childhood sweethearts. We have known each other for many years." Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang also understood. Chapter 1776. There's a conflict between them. Should we help mediate it? Bailey Hongzhuang looked at Di Beichen. Zyra no longer stayed in Cloud Sword sect and ran to Tiangang sect. Presumably, the conflict was not small. Since they were Di Beichen's good friends, it would be great if there was a chance to help mediate it. Di Beichen looked at his wife's kind appearance, and his deep eyes were filled with gentleness. His wife had always been kind. It was only when facing some enemies that she was decisive and ruthless. Hongzhuang had always been very harmonious with her friends. Don't worry about them. They get along like this. After so many years, they have long been used to it. Not only them, even I, as a spectator, have been used to it. The low and magnetic voice was filled with helplessness and lamentation. These two guys really couldn't stop at any time. Seeing that Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes were still flickering with some doubts, Di Beichen smiled and immediately explained. When I was a few years old, I already knew Zyron and Ying. They were engaged since they were young. The two of them have always quarreled every 5 days and had a small quarrel every 3 days. Zyron couldn't win against Ying at all. Therefore, every time he couldn't win against her, he would come to my place. Ying would also chase after him. In the past, before they were married, Ying had always followed behind Zyron like a little tail. However, the two of them are not people who hold grudges. Even if they quarrel fiercely at this moment, they would become glued to each other in a while. Therefore, they often startled the people around them, but the two of them acted as if nothing had happened. I'm already used to it. You will also get used to it in the future. Don't worry about it. It will be fine in 2 days. Seeing that Di Beichen was full of confidence, as if he was used to it, Bailey Hongzhuang also smiled and nodded. Obviously, Zyron and Shangwan Ying were quarrelsome lovers. When they were together, they could not help but quarrel. But once they were separated, they would miss each other very much. This kind of feeling was also a rare and precious kind of love. No matter how much they quarreled, the other party would always be in their hearts. I understand. Although Zyron looked gentle and refined, he spoke without thinking. It was normal for Ying to be at odds with him. She was curious about what Ying looked like. By the way, Beichun, I haven't finished what I wanted to tell you. Bailey Hongzhuang couldn't help but speak up. What she wanted to tell Di Beichen the most was about the primordial chaos ring. The door of darkness in the chaos ring would be of great help to their cultivation. After she told Di Beichen about this, they would be able to cultivate in the door of darkness together. Having more time was a good thing for any cultivator. This way, they would be able to do more things. Di Beichen raised his eyebrows. His voice was hoarse and seductive. We haven't finished what we wanted to do. Hearing Di Beichen's seductive voice, Bailey Hongzhuang couldn't help but recall the scene from before. She immediately glared fiercely at Di Beichen. Be serious? This guy was deliberately saying these words that made her unable to resist. Chapter 1777. My wife, please speak. Your husband is listening. Di Beichen pulled Bailey Hongzhuang's small hand and sat down. He knew that Hongzhuang must have something very serious to tell him. Previously, when Hongzhuang had told him about her time travel, he was still very shocked. However, this did not change anything, and he did not take it to heart. He had no idea what kind of person Bailey Hongzhuang was in the past. He had never met her, much less liked her. When he first met Bailey Hongzhuang, she was already his wife's soul. Therefore, he had always loved his wife. There was no problem with that. Because of this, he naturally did not mind. On the contrary, he felt very fortunate. His wife had traveled through 1,000 years to find him. Beichen, actually, the reason why I had traveled through time was because of a divine weapon. Bailey Hongzhuang stared at Di Beichen's expression. When he heard the 2 words, divine weapon, Di Beichen's expression changed and was now filled with shock. Divine weapon? Di Beichen's deep eyes were filled with shock. Divine weapons existed only in legends and had heaven-defying abilities. In reality, even though he had heard of divine weapons, he had never seen one before. Come to think of it, even the various sects and clans do not have divine weapons. Yet now, his wife was telling him that she had traveled through time because of a divine weapon. Bailey Hongzhuang gently nodded. I've already dripped my blood on it, and that divine weapon has merged into my body. Originally, she had always worn the Chaos Ring on her finger. However, the Chaos Ring was far too valuable, and she had always been worried that she would lose it. Then, one day, after she had fallen asleep, the Chaos Ring had disappeared. At the time, she was shocked. Then, she realized that the Chaos Ring had merged with her and existed in her mind. She was relieved. This was, without a doubt, the best result. This way, she wouldn't have to worry about losing the Chaos Ring. Thinking back to when she first contracted with the Chaos Ring, she was still a little unaccustomed to all of this. As the time of the contract grew longer and longer, she and the Chaos Ring became more and more compatible. Looking at Bailey Hongzhuang's serious expression, Di Beichen knew that Bailey Hongzhuang was telling the truth. Just as Bailey Hongzhuang was thinking about how Di Beichen would react, Di Beichen's face suddenly became serious. His hands tightly grasped Bailey Hongzhuang's hands. Wife, divine artifacts are treasures that only exist in legends. Since you were able to obtain it, it means that your destiny is extraordinary. You mustn't tell anyone about this. If someone with evil intentions hears about it, you might get yourself killed. Di Beichen's eyes could not hide his nervousness and worry. Any cultivator who possessed a treasure like this would definitely keep their mouths shut and not talk about it. Now, his wife had actually told him about this. It was fine if she told him, but if she told anyone else and this news spread, there would be no peace. An ordinary man is innocent, but treasuring a jade ring becomes a crime. This kind of thing happened quite frequently in the Shengxian continent. Therefore, no one who had obtained a treasure dared to make it public. When Bailey Hongzhuang saw Di Beichen's nervous look, her heart could not help but fill with a thick warmth. She knew that Beichen was someone she could trust. Even a divine weapon as amazing as it was still unable to defeat the love between them. Chapter 1778. Seeing that Bailey Hongzhuang was not alert at all and was instead smiling very happily, Di Beichen could not help but frown his good-looking eyebrows. Do you take what I said to heart? As the young sect master of Tiangang sect, he had seen a lot of the world. Not to mention a divine weapon. Even a better weapon would cause a fight. How could he not worry when he saw Hong Zhuang's indifferent look? If the news of a divine weapon was spread, he was afraid that he could only take Hong Zhuang and flee. After all, for such a treasure, he was afraid that the old fellows of various sects and families would have to come forward. In the next moment, Bailey Hongzhuang suddenly hugged Di Beichen. Her face leaned on Di Beichen's chest, and the corners of her lips were filled with a happy and relieved smile. Beichen, I have never told this news to anyone. I just wanted to tell this news to you. Di Beichen, who was originally worried, stiffened slightly after hearing Bailey Hongzhuang's words. In the next second, his eyes became increasingly gentle. Since his wife had not told this news to anyone for so long, it meant that his wife also knew the importance of this divine weapon. However, his wife chose to tell this news to him, which proved that his wife had extraordinary trust in him. This was tantamount to putting her life in his hands. His wife was gambling that the feelings between them were trustworthy. Di Beichen could not help but feel touched. If his wife lost the bet, then she would lose her life. It was enough to see how deep his wife's feelings for him were. He would not let his wife lose. Di Beichen hugged Bailey Hongzhuang with both hands. He only felt that their hearts were closer than before. Wife, what kind of life did you live before? Di Beichen looked curiously at Bailey Hongzhuang. He was also curious about his wife's previous life. In the past, he thought that he knew Hongzhuang very well. Now, he realized that the life he knew before was not the real life of Hongzhuang at all. He wanted to know everything about Hongzhuang. In the past, he did not participate in Hongzhuang's life, but he could understand. As for the future, he would always be in Hongzhuang's life. I used to be the head of the Bailey family. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled. Now that there was someone who could listen to her talk about her previous life, she really felt very happy. This kind of thing had always been suppressed in her heart. She did not even have a person to share it with. After a long time, it was inevitable to feel a little depressed. If she told this news to others, they would think that she had gone crazy. Now that the person closest to her had come to listen to her, there was an indescribable satisfaction in her heart. Hearing Bailey Hongzhuang's words, Di Beichen understood that the Bailey family she was talking about was a real big family. At this moment, Di Beichen finally understood why Hongzhuang had such an intimidating aura. This kind of aura appearing in the younger generation was very shocking. Now that he knew that Hongzhuang was actually the head of an aristocratic family in her previous life, he also understood. As long as one was in power, their aura was far from what ordinary people could compare to. Even if Hongzhuang had transmigrated, her soul was still there, so her aura was still there. Beichun, is there no longer a Bailey family in the Shangxian continent? Bailey Hongzhuang could not help but raise her head to look at Di Beichun, her eyes flashing with hope. Chapter 1779. Even if things had changed 1,000 years later, and the Bailey family would no longer remember anything about her, she still hoped that the Bailey family could continue to pass on. Di Beichun saw the hope and anticipation in Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes and felt a little sorry for her. He did not want to disappoint Hongzhuang, but he really did not know that the Bailey family existed in the Shangxian continent. Seeing Di Beichun's hesitant and sorry look, Bailey Hongzhuang's heart gradually sank. It seemed that in the course of 1,000 years, the Bailey family had disappeared into the long river of history. Back when she was the head of the Bailey family had been passed on for hundreds of years, and its position had always been very stable. Now that she had become Bailey Hongzhuang 1,000 years later, she really hoped that the Bailey family would continue to exist. She did not expect that in the end, she would not be able to see the Bailey family again. Wife, don't be sad. Di Beichun gently stroked Bailey Hongzhuang's back. As the head of the Bailey family in her past life, needless to say, her feelings for the Bailey family must be very deep. Back then, she had left the Bailey family because of an accident. Now, she naturally hoped that she would have the chance to see them again. Unfortunately, the world was unpredictable. Although the foundation of an aristocratic family was very shocking and the average person could not shake it. However, no one knew what would happen after Sheng recovered. Sometimes, some unexpected situations would occur and some forces would completely disappear. Hearing Di Beichun's consolation, Bailey Hongzhuang nodded slightly. She had always had a trace of hope in her heart, but she also knew that the possibility of this was not very high. Back then, when she had suddenly fallen, it must have been a great blow to the Bailey family. At that time, the Bailey family's foundation was very strong, and ordinary aristocratic families were no match for them. And because of their strength, they had many opponents. The Bailey family had always been eyeing them covetously. If there were any problems, they would not miss the opportunity to strike. Obviously, her sudden fall was an opportunity that their opponents could create. Bailey Hongzhuang did not dare to continue thinking. If the disappearance of the Bailey family was really related to her fall, then she would really be a sinner. She didn't want such a thing to happen, but she couldn't help but feel that the possibility of it happening was very high. A feeling of sadness spread in her heart. All this time, she had only hoped that she could lead the Bailey family to become stronger and stronger. She had never thought that the Bailey family would one day suffer because of her. Looking at Bailey Hongzhuang's pale face, Di Beichun understood Bailey Hongzhuang's thoughts and couldn't help but feel distressed. Wife, none of this has anything to do with you. Don't think too much about it. However, such words obviously did not have much effect on Bailey Hongzhuang. I'm just a little sad. After all, it's the family that I've lived in for so many years. Bailey Hongzhuang's lips curled into a smile, but that smile did not reach her eyes. The group of old men in the family must have been unable to accept the news of her fall. She knew these old men very well. Usually, when they spoke, it was as if they couldn't wait to chase you away, but in fact, they were very concerned about her. They just didn't show it because of their pride. Chapter 1780. My dear wife, what's the use of the divine weapon that you've obtained? I've heard that divine weapons have always been extraordinary, and their uses far exceed the expectations of ordinary people. D. Bachan's deep and enchanting eyes were filled with astonishment. He had never paid much attention to this kind of existence that only existed in legends. Most of the time, he even felt that it didn't exist at all. Now that Hong Zhuang was clearly able to help him solve his doubts, he naturally wanted to know more about it. Seeing that D. Bachan had a rare look of confusion, Bailey Hong Zhuang smiled and explained. The use of the divine weapon is also very astonishing. Before I obtained the Chaos Ring, I had never thought that the divine weapon would have such an incredible use. Back then, after I had dripped my blood on the divine weapon to become its master, the divine weapon's power was simply too astonishing and caused an energy fluctuation. As a result, my physical body had turned into nothingness. If it weren't for the Chaos Ring, I wouldn't have been able to become Bailey Hongzhuang today. Since she had already told D. Bachan about the Chaos Ring, Bailey Hongzhuang didn't hide anything and immediately told D. Bachan everything about the Chaos Ring. The more D. Bachan listened to Bailey Hongzhuang, the more astonished he became. This was simply too astonishing. If it weren't for Hong Zhuang's description, he wouldn't have been able to imagine it at all. You mean to say that Xiao He and Xiao Bai were originally the demonic beasts in the Chaos Ring? D. Bachan raised his voice and his handsome face was filled with astonishment. All this time, he had never understood what kind of demonic beasts Xiao He and Xiao Bai were. He had understood many demonic beasts, and he even had some understanding of the Beast Kings. However, he really couldn't recognize existences like Xiao He and Xiao Bai. Bailey Hongzhuang nodded slightly. Yes, ever since I transmigrated, Xiao He and Xiao Bai have been accompanying me. Although the two little fellows were usually gluttons, they were still very concerned about her. Then, does the fact that you can contract 3 contracted beasts have something to do with the Chaos Ring? D. Bachan immediately thought of this possibility. Since Xiao He and Xiao Bai were both demonic beasts from the Chaos Ring, and they had both recognized Bailey Hongzhuang as their master, it was obvious that this had something to do with the Chaos Ring. Yes, Bailey Hongzhuang smiled. D. Bachan was really smart. She only said part of it, but D. Bachan had already guessed the latter part. So you learned your inscription technique in the Chaos Ring. I was wondering who you learned your inscription technique from. D. Bachan chuckled. He had always been amazed by Hong Zhuang's talent in medicine, alchemy, and inscription techniques. However, he had never understood when Hong Zhuang had learned them. As early as when he was in Fengbo country, he had already known that Hong Zhuang was skilled in medicine and alchemy. However, he had never heard Hong Zhuang say that she knew inscription techniques. It hadn't been long since Hong Zhuang had left for the Azure Water School, and he had gone to find Hong Zhuang. After that, he had always been by Hong Zhuang's side. However, Hong Zhuang had suddenly mastered the inscription technique, and she did not have any master by her side. This was too unbelievable. It wasn't until this moment that he completely understood. Seeing this, Bailey Hongzhuang couldn't help but chuckle. She thought that Bachan must be confused about her past changes. Chapter 1781. I don't know when Ying will come today, and when Xiren may come to find us at any time, so we can't go to the Door of Darkness for the time being. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled slightly. She originally planned to go to the Door of Darkness to cultivate with D. Bachan today, but now it was obviously impossible. It took 3 days to enter the Door of Darkness, which was equivalent to half a day in the outside world. D. Bachan nodded. I estimate that Ying will come in the afternoon. Whenever Xiren disappears, Ying will come directly to the Tiangang sect, and Xiren will be here every time. Then let's cultivate here and wait for Ying to come. Around evening, Bailey Hongzhuang and D. Bachan, who were cultivating, heard a voice coming from above. Bachan, did Xiren come to you again? As the voice fell, the figure was ready to enter the cultivation room. Seeing this, Bailey Hongzhuang couldn't help but find it funny. Shangguan Ying and Wen Xiren were indeed a match made in heaven. and the way they appeared was exactly the same. It seemed that these two people really knew Di Beichen's palace very well. Di Beichen didn't answer, but still sat in the same place, waiting for Shangguan Yingying to come down. Not long after, a woman in a light yellow dress appeared in front of Bailey Hongzhuang. The woman's appearance was dignified and delicate, and her every move revealed the aura of nobility, but the anger between her eyebrows was very obvious, and there was quite a bit of indignation. "Don't you know where Xiren usually is?" Di Beichen looked at Shangguan Yingying in front of him and smiled faintly. "You can go directly to him." When Shangguan Yingying saw Bailey Hongzhuang, her eyes couldn't help but light up, and the anger between her eyebrows instantly dissipated into nothingness and turned into thick excitement. "You're Hongzhuang, right?" Although it was a question, what Shangguan Yingying said was a statement. She had known Di Beichen for so many years, but she had never seen Di Beichen so close to any woman. Although Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichen were just sitting to the side, her woman's intuition told her that they were very close. In fact, Di Beichen had never brought another woman to the cultivation room. At first, Di Beichen was the only one in the cultivation room. It was only because Xiren was always acting shamelessly that he followed Di Beichen into the cultivation room. She had been with Xiren since she was young, so she was already used to it. Therefore, after Xiren entered the cultivation room, she followed closely behind. Even though Han Shilling had grown up with Di Beichen since she was a child, she had never been inside. Just from this point, she could tell that the woman in front of her was different in Di Beichen's heart. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled and nodded. "Yingying, it's nice to meet you." Seeing that Bailey Hongzhuang already knew who she was, Shangguan Yingying's eyes were filled with a touch of surprise. At the same time, she said with a smile, "Since I knew you, I have always wanted to meet you. I didn't expect to finally meet you today. I'm very happy that you can take in Di Beichen, this evildoer. In the future, Xiren and I don't have to worry about him being alone." When these words came out, Di Beichen's face couldn't help but darken. What did she mean by worrying about him being alone? Bailey Hongzhuang couldn't help but laugh. It seemed that Xiren and Shangguan Yingying were really worried about his marriage. Chapter 1782. Hearing Di Beichen's words, Shangguan Yingying waved her hand indifferently. "Let him do whatever he wants." With that, Shangguan Yingying sat down next to Bailey Hongzhuang, her pretty face filled with joy. "Hongzhuang, you don't know, but when you went to participate in the assessment competition, Beichen was extremely nervous. Xiren and I have never seen him like that. Xiren kept lamenting to me that Di Beichen, who had never fallen in love before, had also fallen in love." Bailey Hongzhuang couldn't help but look at Di Beichen. She had always known that Beichen had deep feelings for her. It seemed that Beichen was really worried about her in the 2 years that she wasn't around. Di Beichen glanced at Shangguan Yingying and then looked at Bailey Hongzhuang next to him with affection. His love for his wife could be witnessed by heaven and earth. Seeing that Di Beichen didn't care about what she had said, Shangguan Yingying's eyes were filled with amazement. Compared to Xiren's shamelessness, Di Beichen was more careful. Now that she had said such things, Di Beichen could still be so calm. It could be seen that the relationship between Di Beichen and Bailey Hongzhuang was not ordinary. "Hongzhuang, with you by Beichen's side, Xiren and I are much more relieved. Although it's only the first time we've met, I feel that we will become good friends." Shangguan Yingying's face was filled with a kind smile. She liked Bailey Hongzhuang very much at first sight. Di Beichen's outstanding appearance was well known. In the past, she and Xiren always felt that Di Beichen could not find a match for him. However, now that Hongzhuang was standing next to Di Beichen, they were an unusual match. Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes were soft, and her smile was sincere and joyful. "We will definitely be good friends." She also had a good impression of Shangguan Yingying. This woman gave people a very sincere feeling when they first met. There was a real elegance in her speech. Although all this disappeared when she mentioned Xiren, she liked friends who treated her with sincerity. Seeing that Bailey Hongzhuang had the same thoughts as her, the smile on Shangguan Yingying's face deepened. "Beichen, you made the right choice this time. The first time I saw Hong Zhuang, I felt that you two were a good match. You're not like Han Xiling. I've seen him since he was a child, but I still feel that he's not suitable for you. Shangguan Yingying sighed. Speaking of which, she, Xiren, Di Beichun, and Han Xiling grew up together. However, she had never liked Han Xiling. She just didn't like Han Xiling's pretense of being aloof. He obviously didn't have much ability, but he still acted like he was great. She felt that he was pretentious and not down-to-earth at all. It was precisely because of this that most of the time, Di Beichun, Xiren, and she were often together. Hearing this, Di Beichun glanced at Shangguan Yingying and did not mention Han Xiling. In that case, I have to thank you for taking care of my heart for so many years. Di Beichun raised his eyebrows. Shangguan Yingying was spilling beans about his past. Shangguan Yingying smiled and said proudly, "It's good that you know." Di Beichun's eyes darkened. He always had a feeling that Yingying would lead Hong Zhuang astray if she stayed with Hong Zhuang for too long. I think I'd better let Xiren take you away. Chapter 1783. Since he likes to run away from home so much, then let him go. I won't bother with him. Shangguan Yingying snored coldly. Xiren had always been like this. Every time there was a conflict, he would only run away. This time, she also ignored Xiren. She wanted to see what Xiren would do. As she spoke, Shangguan Yingying once again looked at Bailey Hong Zhuang with a smile and said, "Hong Zhuang, I'm afraid I'll be staying in Tiangang's sect for this period of time. You won't find me annoying, right?" Bailey Hong Zhuang shook her head and said, "Of course not. That's great." Shangguan Yingying was excited. "Then I'll live with you for this period of time. I can also tell you about Di Beichun's past." Bailey Hong Zhuang subconsciously looked at Di Beichun. Speaking of which, she was really curious about Di Beichun's past. "Okay," Bailey Hong Zhuang said with a smile. Seeing this, Di Beichun looked at Bailey Hong Zhuang with deep meaning. His expression revealed some reluctance. Originally, he and Hong Zhuang were enjoying their two-person world. He didn't expect that now Xiren wasn't enough to stir things up. There was also Shangguan Yingying. Looking at this situation, Yingying would probably rely on Hong Zhuang for this period of time. Didn't this mean that he wouldn't have a chance during this period of time? This won't do. Di Beichun secretly thought in his heart. He had to quickly make Xiren and Yingying reconcile. Noticing Di Beichun's gaze, Bailey Hong Zhuang pretended not to see it. She was very clear about what this big pervert was thinking. Xiren had already heard Shangguan Yingying's movements in the room. The corners of his lips unconsciously rose a little. Every time he left, Yingying would arrive shortly after he arrived at Tiangang's sect. Thinking about it, Yingying would come to find him in the room soon. In terms of eloquence, he really couldn't compare to Yingying. He really didn't understand how a woman could be so calculative over such a small matter. However, he had been with Yingying for so many years and had experience in dealing with her. As long as he left, Yingying wouldn't be bothered by it anymore. After all, women were unreasonable when they were angry. If she was given some time to calm down, she would naturally understand. However, Xiren waited in the house for a long time, but Yingying did not come to find him. He could not help but frown. This wasn't right. Since Yingying was already here, why didn't she come to find him? She must have just met Hong Zhuang. Yingying is greeting her. When Xiren pondered, yes, that must be it. However, as time passed, Shangguan Yingying did not appear. When Xiren was dumbfounded. Where did Yingying go? Why hasn't she come yet? When Xiren frowned. The situation this time was obviously beyond his expectations. For so many years, the way he got along with Yingying had not changed. Why did Yingying not follow the routine today? As time passed, when Xiren became more and more anxious, and the thoughts in his mind became more and more. Could it be that I'm too wrong this time? Is Yingying really angry? If she is really angry, she shouldn't come to Tiangang's sect to find me. What the hell is going on? When Xiren kept pacing in the room, the more he couldn't understand, the more anxious he became. If it weren't for his face, he would have gone out to find Shangguan Yingying now. Chapter 1784. Hearing the footsteps, when Xiren, who was originally pacing anxiously, quickly sat down in a serious manner, as if nothing had happened before. Creak. The door opened, and a figure walked into the room. When Xiren's back was facing the door, and he didn't turn around. Come on, stop pretending. Ying didn't come. Di Baichen looked at Xiren's posture, and knew that Xiren was pretending. He directly opened the door and went straight to the point. Hearing Di Baichen's voice, Xiren couldn't help but turn around. After seeing that there was only Di Baichen and Shangwan Ying's figure behind him, he couldn't help but frown. His expression was filled with doubts. Where's Ying? Your Ying abducted my Hong Zhuang. Di Baichen walked to the opposite side of Xiren and sat down. His beautiful face was filled with helplessness. Xiren was dumbfounded. What's going on? Your Ying has already decided to stay in Tiangang's sect and be good sisters with Hong Zhuang. Hong Zhuang said that it doesn't matter how long she wants to stay. In my opinion, you'd better coax Ying quickly. Di Baichen was very sad. It was fine that Xiren and Ying had a conflict, but who would have thought that Ying would actually occupy Hong Zhuang? In desperation, he could only team up with Xiren. When Xiren, who was originally very helpless, couldn't help but laugh after seeing Di Baichen's appearance. Haha, Di Baichen, it seems that you really like Hong Zhuang. In the past, everyone thought that you weren't interested in women. I think you put all your interest in Hong Zhuang. When Xiren laughed loudly. In the past, you couldn't stand me being with Ying. Now it's my turn to be unable to stand you. He clearly remembered that when he and Ying were together in the past, Di Baichen couldn't stand them. He didn't expect that now that Ying had just snatched Hong Zhuang for a while, Di Baichen had already urged him to reconcile with Ying. However, Di Baichen didn't take Xiren's ridicule to heart. At that time, I was a single man. Now I have a wife. Of course, it's different. Looking at Di Baichen's unperturbed expression, Xiren also felt a burst of admiration. To be able to say such things with such a serious appearance. She was afraid that besides Di Baichen, there was no other person who could do it. Then what should we do now? When Xiren frowned. If Ying really lived with Hong Zhuang in Tiangang's sect, then the person who is troubled should be him. Who asked you to run away every time something happens? Now that your wife has run away, you can only chase after her. Di Baichen shrugged indifferently. He had never interfered in the matters between Xiren and Ying, because, with the degree of rebuke between these two people, once they reconciled, then the person who was in the wrong would be him. He, Di Baichen, wouldn't do such a thankless thing. You're too unloyal. When Xiren was speechless, in any case, we're brothers. For other things, you can ask me for help. But for this kind of thing, it's better for you to solve it yourself. Di Baichen shook his head. He also had no experience in dealing with this kind of thing. Fortunately, Hong Zhuang had always had an excellent character. From the time they got along until now, they had been apart more than together. Naturally, it was impossible for them to have a dispute. Chapter 1785. At dinner time, Bailey Hong Zhuang and Shangwan Ying had dinner together. Shangwan Ying was extremely enthusiastic. She was like an old friend to Bailey Hong Zhuang at first sight. She pulled Bailey Hong Zhuang and said a lot of things to her. However, Bailey Hong Zhuang could feel that Ying was still thinking about Xiren. From that subtle expression, it could be judged that she always looked outside the house from time to time. Although the movements were very small, they were still seen by Bailey Hong Zhuang. Bailey Hong Zhuang also looked outside the house. She didn't know if Baichen would come over with Xiren at dinner time. She naturally hoped that the unpleasantness between Ying and Xiren could be resolved as soon as possible. In this way, Ying could be happier. Since Ying came, Ying had been talking about various things when she was young with Xiren and Di Baichen. Although Ying mainly talked about Baichen to her, she couldn't help but talk about Xiren. Just from this expression, Bailey Hong Zhuang could understand Ying's feelings for Xiren. However, Baichen didn't come with Xiren until now. Bailey Hong Zhuang couldn't help but frown. She didn't ask Ying why she was unhappy with Xiren this time. However, since Ying had already come to Tiangang's sect, Xiren should also come to see her. A moment later, 2 footsteps sounded outside the house. Hearing this sound, Shangguan Yingying's eyes changed a little, but she forced herself not to look outside the house. When Ziren walked into the house behind Di Beichun, after seeing Bailey Hongzhuang, Di Beichun smiled gently and sat down beside Bailey Hongzhuang. When Ziren glanced at Di Beichun, then unnaturally sat down beside Shangguan Yingying. Looking at this scene, Bailey Hongzhuang couldn't help but find it a little funny. She couldn't tell that Ziren's sunny and confident appearance from before would have such an expression when facing Yingying. Shangguan Yingying also knew that Ziren was beside her, but she didn't say anything. She only minded her own business and ate her own food. The atmosphere suddenly became awkward. Bailey Hongzhuang looked at Shangguan Yingying and then at Ziren. Neither of them spoke. Di Beichun held Bailey Hongzhuang's little hand under the table and said with a smile, "Don't worry about them. It'll be fine in a while." Bailey Hongzhuang didn't know how Di Beichun came to this conclusion, but she always believed in Di Beichun's words. Under Di Beichun's signal, Bailey Hongzhuang quickly finished her meal and then walked out of the house with Di Beichun. Shangguan Hongzhuang couldn't help but want to say something when she saw that Bailey Hongzhuang was about to leave. However, she still didn't say anything after Di Beichun held Bailey Hongzhuang's hand and left. Di Beichun and Bailey Hongzhuang returned to their own house together. Bailey Hongzhuang's lips curled into a faint smile. As long as Yingying and Ziren met, the problem would be solved soon. "You called Ziren over?" Bailey Hongzhuang asked with a smile. "He didn't deal with the trouble he caused himself. Could it be that he wants my wife to help him deal with it?" Di Beichun said. Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang smiled slightly. "Yingying is a very good person. I heard a lot about you from Yingying today." Di Beichun raised his eyebrows and said with a smile, "It's good to know. It's also good to let you know how loyal your husband is to you." Chapter 1786. The next day, when Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichun saw Shangguan Yingying and when Ziren again, everything was as Di Beichun had expected. The two of them had reconciled. From afar, they could feel the closeness between the two. Bailey Hongzhuang also understood Di Beichun's feelings when he saw the two of them being so sweet. "How did you know that they would reconcile so quickly?" Bailey Hongzhuang turned to look at Di Beichun. The quarrel yesterday seemed to be very serious. It would take a while for them to reconcile. Husband and wife always quarrel at the head of the bed and reconcile at the end of the bed. If you don't believe me, you could try in the future. Di Beichun's smile was devilish and teasing. In his eyes, such an ignorant wife was really cute. Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang was startled at first. After understanding Di Beichun's meaning, he couldn't help but glare at Di Beichun. Di Beichun smiled indifferently. Every time he teased his wife, it was always very interesting. After seeing Bailey Hongzhuang, Shangguan Yingying walked over with a smile. "Hongzhuang, you're here." Bailey Hongzhuang greeted her with a smile. "It's great to see that you two have reconciled." Shangguan Yingying curled her lips and subconsciously glanced at Ziren. Then she smiled and said, "If he didn't admit his mistake, I wouldn't have forgiven him." Ziren slowly walked over with a helpless expression. Then he raised his eyebrows and looked at Di Beichun. He had to coax his wife like this. In the future, he would have to do the same. However, Di Beichun didn't care. He would make Hongzhuang angry. "Hongzhuang, I heard that you were the champion of the assessment competition. I really admire you. In order to be together with Beichun, you even participated in the assessment competition. If you're not careful, you might be in danger." Shangguan Yingying's eyes were filled with amazement. If it were her, she would not do such a thing. Bailey Hongzhuang said with an elegant smile on her exquisite and beautiful face, "There are some things that you should take responsibility for." Until now, she did not regret her decision to participate in the assessment competition. Seeing Bailey Hongzhuang so calm, Shangguan Yingying and Ziren felt even more emotional. Di Beichun's vision was always good. He went to Fengbo country and was able to find such a good wife. As friends, they were happy for Di Beichun. Han Xiling is always so aggressive. "Hongzhuang, I'm starting to like you more and more." Shangguan Yingying turned to Di Beichun and said, Beichun, Hong Zhuang is my friend. If you dare to mistreat her in the future, I won't let you off. If I mistreat her, who else can I treat well? Di Beichun's expression was calm. From a moment he fell in love with Hong Zhuang. He was determined to treat Hong Zhuang well. He would not forgive anyone who dared to hurt Hong Zhuang, and it was even more impossible for him to do so. Seeing Di Beichun's solemn expression, Shangwan Yingying was slightly stunned, but then she smiled. It's good that you know. Bailey Hong Zhuang looked at Di Beichun in front of her, and the corners of her mouth unconsciously rose. Beichun had always been able to give her an indescribable sense of security. Di Beichun put one hand on Bailey Hong Zhuang's shoulder. You don't have to worry about me and Hong Zhuang. It's good that you don't have to have any conflicts. Chapter 1787. When Xiren, who was still gloating, was dumbfounded when he saw Shangwan Yingying suddenly turn the spearhead to him. How did the problem shift to him? Di Beichun looked at Wen Xiren with a smile. Who asked this guy to be so proud now? Now he couldn't be proud anymore. Wife, I'm also very good to you. Wen Xiren's face was full of smiles. He finally reconciled with Yingying, and he didn't want to have another conflict later. Seeing this, Bailey Hong Zhuang and Di Beichun's faces were full of smiles. From Di Beichun's mouth, Bailey Hong Zhuang learned that Dr. Feng, who helped Di Beichun treat his leg disease, was found by Wen Xiren. When Di Beichun was in Feng Bo country, Xiren and Shangwan Yingying were still very concerned about him. They cherished the friendship they had built up since they were young. When Xiren and Shangwan Yingying stayed in Tiangang's sect for a few days before leaving. The two also had a lot of things to deal with in the sect, so they couldn't stay out for too long. In the blink of an eye, 3 months had passed. Today was the day when the new disciples came to report. Bailey Hong Zhuang left the cultivation state early, waiting for the arrival of Jiqing and the others. These days, she, Beichun, and the 3 beasts often cultivated in the Door of Darkness. Di Beichun was obviously very interested in the world in the Door of Darkness. With Di Beichun by Bailey Hong Zhuang's side, she was also a lot safer in the desert world. With less threat to her life, she could also deal with the monsters wholeheartedly. As long as Bailey Hong Zhuang didn't ask for help, Di Beichun wouldn't help. After all, Hong Zhuang also needed the opportunity to improve her strength. The 3 beasts were also diligently cultivating here. Xiao He and Xiao Bai transformed into huge figures under Di Beichun's astonished gaze. White Lion's body was also constantly growing. This was the most suitable place for him to cultivate. Every time after a big battle, White Lion would eat demon crystals and replenish itself quickly. Wife, Gong Shaoqing, and the others should have already arrived at the mountain gate. Let's go take a look. You'll be cultivating with them today, Di Beichun said slowly. Bailey Hong Zhuang nodded. Okay, let's go take a look. On such an important day, Gong Shaoqing and the others would not be late. Di Beichun and Bailey Hong Zhuang walked together to the gate of Tiangang's sect. From today onwards, Bailey Hong Zhuang chose to cultivate in one of the 4 halls. Today was the day that the new disciples came to report. The disciples of Tiangang's sect all knew, and many people were paying close attention. Although they already knew that Bailey Hong Zhuang won first place in the assessment competition, they were still curious about which dynasty the other cultivators were from. When Di Beichun and Bailey Hong Zhuang appeared in front of everyone, everyone's eyes were filled with amazement. They knew that Bailey Hong Zhuang was staying in the young sect master's bedroom during this period. Moreover, the sect master obviously had no objections to Bailey Hong Zhuang and Di Beichun being together. In their opinion, it wouldn't be long before the young sect master and Bailey Hong Zhuang got married. In this way, Bailey Hong Zhuang's identity would be completely different in the future. It seems that the relationship between the young sect master and Bailey Hong Zhuang is really good. The young sect master really likes Bailey Hong Zhuang. This Bailey Hong Zhuang is really lucky. Chapter 1788. The cultivators of Tiangang sect no longer disliked Bailey Hong Zhuang as before, because after the assessment competition, Bailey Hongzhuang had already proven her strength. Now, everyone could only sigh with emotion at Bailey Hongzhuang's good luck to be able to meet the young sect master when he was at his lowest point. She was really lucky. In fact, many people also understood that Bailey Hongzhuang was not trying to climb up the social ladder. This was because when the young sect master left Tiangang's sect, he had already become a cripple. Even the disciples who were cultivating in Tiangang's sect at that time felt that the young sect master would never be able to stand up again after seeing him in that state. Therefore, at that time, other than lamenting, they did not have any thoughts of getting close to the young sect master. Therefore, it was not strange for the young sect master to fall in love with Bailey Hongzhuang. The feeling of providing charcoal in snowy weather was often extremely precious. Some male cultivators understood this very well. The woman who climbed up the social ladder when they were successful could not be compared to the woman who accompanied them when they were suffering. It was because they understood this feeling that many male cultivators respected Bailey Hongzhuang. To be able to be together with Deep Beichun under such circumstances, this kind of woman was worthy of admiration. Bailey Hongzhuang listened to the discussions of the surrounding cultivators and could not help but find it funny. It seemed that in many people's eyes, she was the one with extremely good luck. Young sect master, Miss Bailey. A gray figure appeared beside Bailey Hongzhuang and Deep Beichun and bowed to them with a modest smile on his face. Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang could not help but turn around to look at the person. She had met this elder before, but she did not know him very well. Deep Beichun lowered his head to see Bailey Hongzhuang's astonished look and immediately explained. It should have been the great elder who came to welcome the new disciple, but the great elder is still in confinement, so the second elder was sent. Bailey Hongzhuang suddenly understood. She had not seen the great elder since he was punished. She understood that whether it was her grandfather or Beichun, they were slowly dispersing the power in the great elder's hands. Since she recognized her grandfather, he had doted on her very much, and she also understood that her grandfather was a very protective person. Since the great elder was a threat to her, her grandfather naturally would not let such a threat continue to exist. Perhaps the great elder would not come out for a while. Even if he came out, the situation would be completely different from before. However, this was a good thing for her. Originally, she was still a little worried that after she came to Tiangang's sect to cultivate, the first elder would obstruct her. Now that the first elder was punished and confined, she was also free of this trouble. Second elder. Bailey Hongzhuang bowed to the second elder, Xiaoingzi. Seeing Bailey Hongzhuang bowing to him, Xiaoingzi was slightly stunned and somewhat flattered. Everyone knew that Bailey Hongzhuang was the future wife of the young sect master, and her status was very noble. However, Bailey Hongzhuang and the young sect master had not yet married. So as the elders of the sect, they were very conflicted about how to treat Bailey Hongzhuang. At this moment, seeing Bailey Hongzhuang bowing to him, he could not help but be a little surprised. This Chapter 1789. Di Beichun nodded to Xiaoingzi and said, Hongzhuang is now a new disciple of Tiangang's sect. Second elder should treat her as you should. You don't have to care about anything else. Hongzhuang had already told him about this matter before. Since she was a cultivator who had passed the assessment competition and joined Tiangang's sect, she naturally did not want to get too many privileges in this regard. She should cultivate well. After all, they had not married yet. Listening to Di Beichun's words, Xiaoingzi responded, Yes. Xiaoingzi, who was still worried about how to deal with this matter, was relieved after hearing Di Beichun's words. At least he didn't have to worry about whether he should salute Bailey Hongzhuang or Bailey Hongzhuang. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled slightly. At present, she was just an ordinary disciple of Tiangang's sect. After cultivating here for 3 months, she would go to Wuji Palace to learn from her master. If she was treated too special here, it would cause inconvenience to the elders. Second elder, are you going to pick up the new disciples now? Di Beichun asked aloud. Xiaoingzi nodded and said, Yes, it's almost time now. I think they have already arrived. Then let's go down together. Di Baichen looked at Bailey Hongzhuang. He thought that Hongzhuang had not seen Xia Jiqing and the others for such a long time. She should miss them very much. Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes were tinged with joy. When Jiqing and the others returned to their respective homes, they must be very happy. Now that they could cultivate together in Tiangang's sect, this was undoubtedly a very happy thing. Yes, Qiao Yingzi responded, and then followed Di Baichen and Bailey Hongzhuang to the bottom of Tiangang's sect. He was different from the Great Elder. He was originally on the side of the young sect master. Now that the sect master had returned, Tiangang's sect had the sect master in charge, and the sect master had given all the rights to the young sect master. At this time, the best way was to listen to the arrangements of the young sect master. Those who had previously been hostile to the young sect master did not have a good ending. He would never make such a mistake. Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Baichen went all the way down the mountain and soon arrived at the gate. Gong Shaoqing, Xia Jiqing, and the others had already arrived outside. With the appearance of Bailey Hongzhuang and the others, Xia's and the others' faces all showed smiles. "Boss, you are here." After not seeing Bailey Hongzhuang for more than 2 months, Xia Jiqing only felt a burst of joy when she saw her. Ever since she met Boss, apart from when Boss went to the Bloodground Abyss, she had always been with Boss. This time, she had been Miss to Sect, Miss Master. She had long known that the Sect Master must have come to Tiangang's sect with Di Baichen early. Now that she saw the Sect Master coming to pick them up, she felt very happy. Bailey Hongzhuang's face was also filled with a happy smile. "You are here." Gong Shaoqing and the others smiled and nodded. Compared to the unreachable feeling when they first came to Tiangang's sect, there was only excitement in their hearts now. "I haven't seen you for a while. Everyone's face is a lot rosier." Chapter 1790. Listening to Bailey Hongzhuang's words, Dongfang Yu and the others all laughed. With the results they achieved in the assessment competition, it was natural for them to be praised when they returned to their respective dynasties. The people in their families were also very good to them. Under the glorious eyes of everyone, they only felt that the hardships they suffered in the assessment competition were nothing at all. For the final result, everything was worth it. They seemed to have become heroes the moment they returned. Everyone praised them, and many young cultivators regarded them as idols. Such a scene was beyond their expectations. In the past, they had never thought that they would one day achieve such good results. Under such circumstances, they were naturally in a good mood, and their faces immediately became rosy. "Boss, you don't know, after I went back this time, the people in the family praised me to the sky." Xia Jiqing's face could not hide the excitement. She had never enjoyed such treatment in the family before. Although her cultivation talent was not bad, because her personality was too straightforward, there were not many people in the family who liked her. However, after going back this time, her situation had completely changed. "Do you still remember Tong Xingyi?" Xia Jiqing asked aloud. Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang thought for a while and immediately nodded. Thinking back, it was because Tong Xingyi kept finding trouble with her that she met Jiqing. However, after Tong Xingyi learned that she was a student of the special enrollment class, she did not provoke her. Gradually, she didn't take Tong Xingyi to heart. The Tong family is not far from our Xia family. I have had conflicts with Tong Xingyi since I was a child. When I went back, Tong Xingyi was also at home. After she knew my results, she was furious, haha. When she thought of Tong Xingyi's sullen, excited and incredulous expression, she felt a burst of joy. In the past, Tong Xingyi always liked to be arrogant in front of her, but now she could only tuck her tail in front of her. Looking at Xia Jiqing's happy appearance, Bailey Hongzhuang's smile widened. As early as the first time they met, she knew that there was a grudge between Jiqing and Tong Xingyi. Now that she could hold her head high, it was indeed a happy thing. At this moment, Yuan Xiaoman also walked to Bailey Hongzhuang's side, her delicate face filled with a joyful smile. "Boss," Li Qing was so excited when she found out that you and I were on the same team. When Yuan Xiaoman returned to the Snow Origin country, Her and Yuan Ji Xian's results in the assessment had already been made known to everyone. Therefore, when they returned to the clan, everyone in the clan was already there to welcome them. When Yuan Hongyang and Yuan Liqing found out that it was because of their boss that they were able to achieve such results in the competition, they were extremely shocked. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled. How was Liqing doing now? She's doing very well. She just hopes to see you again one day. Yuan Xiaoman said with a smile. Yuan Jixin also walked up at this moment, his handsome face relaxed and happy. Boss, Hongyang asked me to thank you on behalf of the entire Yuan family. If it weren't for you, the Yuan family situation wouldn't be as good as it is now. Chapter 1791. Back then, when the big boss and the young sect master had gone to Origin Martial City, they had helped the Yuan family. Otherwise, the Yuan family would have fallen into trouble. After that, he and Xiaoman had met the big boss and had been helped by the big boss. This news had exceeded the expectations of everyone in the Yuan family. In the history of the Snow Origin dynasty, there has never been such a good result. Therefore, their names have now spread throughout the entire Snow Origin country. Even though he had a dream of becoming a hero since he was young, he had never thought that he would actually be able to achieve it. Now, he was a hero that everyone in the Snow Origin country knew about. The entire Yuan family was proud of him and Xiaoman. All of this was because of the big boss. If it had not been for the big boss, forget about becoming a hero. They would have become corpses in the great examination. Therefore, Yuan Jixin's gratitude towards Bailey Hongzhuang could no longer be expressed in words. He had already secretly vowed that he would go through water and tread on fire for the big boss in the future. If it had not been for the big boss, they would have lost everything by now. Therefore, their lives belonged to the big boss. It was not only Yuan Jixin, Yuan Xiaoman also had the same thought. In the future, anyone who tried to harm the big boss would be their enemy. If they wanted to harm the big boss, they would have to step over their bodies. Bailey Hongzhuang was unaware of Yuan Jixin and Yuan Xiaoman's thoughts. After hearing Yuan Hongzhuang's gratitude towards her, she could not help but smile. Unknowingly, so much time had passed since they had been in the blood-ground abyss. If she had the chance, she would really like to go back with Beichun and have a look. You don't have to be so polite, we're all friends. Bailey Hongzhuang's voice was light and pleasant to the ear. When she thought about how they had left the Tian Gang sect 2 years ago without knowing the future and how they had all become disciples of the Tian Gang sect, her heart was filled with joy. Looking at Bailey Hongzhuang, who didn't feel like she had done anything great, Yuan Jixin and Yuan Xiaoman looked at each other and smiled. Their big boss was like that. She had clearly done something that they were deeply grateful towards, yet she felt that it was nothing. However, it was this kind of big boss that they were willing to give up everything for. This was boss's charm. Di Beichen glanced at the cultivators present. Apart from Bailey Hongzhuang, there were a total of 10 people present. Since everyone is here, let's go in. Di Beichen's voice was gentle and dignified. In front of Hongzhuang, he was always gentle, but in front of other practitioners, he had to show the dignity of a young sect leader. As Bailey Hongzhuang's words fell, Xia Jiqing and the others were stunned. From today onwards, they were disciples of Tian Gang sect. This day was of great significance to them. Although Di Beichen had always been a friend in his eyes, this was Tian Gang sect, and Di Beichen was their young sect master. Therefore, their attitude could not be as casual as before, at least in front of others. Bailey Hongzhuang quietly walked into the team. From today on, she was also a new disciple of Tian Gang sect. Everything needed to be done well. Chapter 1792. The next moment, Di Beichun directly took Bailey Hongzhuang's hand and pulled her out of the team and immediately walked towards the top of Tian Gang sect. Looking at Di Beichun's actions, Bailey Hongzhuang couldn't help but be stunned and whispered, Beichun, now the entire Tian Gang sect already knows that you are my wife. It is too late for you to pretend now. Di Beichun's tone was overbearing and gentle. He promised Hongzhuang that he would treat her like an ordinary cultivator when he was cultivating. However, he did not promise to hide their identity. Therefore, Hong Zhuang was indeed an ordinary disciple of Tiangang's sect, but she was also Di Beichen's wife. Bailey Hong Zhuang was slightly stunned. Didn't Di Beichen promise her before that he would treat her like an ordinary disciple? In addition to the time of cultivation, you're my wife on weekdays. Di Beichen said again. When his voice fell, Di Beichen no longer said anything, and just walked with Hong Zhuang. After seeing Di Beichen's overbearing appearance, Xia Jiqing and others showed a smile on their faces. Di Beichen is really good to the boss. Now the entire Tiangang sect already knows that the boss is Di Beichen's wife. Xia Jiqing's eyes were filled with joy. Seeing that the relationship between the boss and Di Beichen was so good, she was really happy for the boss. I don't know when a young sect master and the boss will get married. Yuan Xiaoman raised an eyebrow. With the relationship between the young sect master and the boss so good, it should be a matter of course to get married. It should be soon. In fact, the boss and the young sect master have already been married before, but the identity of the young sect master at that time is different from the current one, so the previous one doesn't seem to count. After hearing Yuan Xiaoman's address to Di Beichen, Xia Jiqing also changed the address. If she directly called Di Beichen's name in Tiangang's sect, it seemed to be too disrespectful to the young sect master. Hearing this, Yuan Xiaoman suddenly understood. When a young sect master and the boss went to the Yuan family together, they all thought that the boss and the young sect master were newlyweds. She didn't know much about the boss's previous affairs, but as long as she knew that good things were coming, it was enough. I don't know if the sect master is as satisfied with the boss, and the great elder knows that Han Xiling is dead. He will definitely not give up. Yuan Xiaoman was a little worried, but judging from the situation when the boss came to pick them up, things shouldn't be as bad as she thought. Xia Jiqing's eyes also sank. She had long known that the great elder was unscrupulous. She was afraid that the boss would inevitably encounter trouble after coming to Tiangang's sect. However, Xia Jiqing's sect master's eyes. With the young sect master's love for the boss, he should not let the great elder bully the boss. Although Gong Shaoqing and the others did not speak, they were also worried about the situation of Bailey Hongzhuang. They all knew in their hearts that if it were not for Bailey Hongzhuang, they would still be passers-by. Gong Shaoqing and Dongfang, you remember the time when they first met Bailey Hongzhuang, and now they only felt that all the changes were really not small. In fact, when they saw Hong Zhuang for the first time, they had a feeling that she was different from the rest. Hong Zhuang was born to be the kind of woman who attracted the attention of everyone. As long as she appeared, people would unconsciously be attracted to her. Chapter 1793. Behind Xia Jiqing and the others, Pan Zimo and Dong Hongyun couldn't help but look at each other. After seeing that Di Beichen was so good to Bailey Hongzhuang, their hearts were full of shock. Although they already knew the identity of Bailey Hongzhuang, now that they saw how much Di Beichen doted on Bailey Hongzhuang, they couldn't help but be speechless. As early as the end of the assessment, Di Beichen personally went to pick up Bailey Hongzhuang. This scene made everyone surprised. In the past, they were also proud, but in front of Bailey Hongzhuang and the young sect master, they didn't have the capital to be proud. Dong Honyun couldn't help but rejoice. After knowing the identity of Bailey Hongzhuang, he apologized in time and was forgiven by Bailey Hongzhuang. If that was the case, the only path left for him was death. Thinking that Han Xiling died in the hands of Bailey Hongzhuang, but the young sect master was still so good to Bailey Hongzhuang. Just this point, it could be seen that Bailey Hongzhuang's extraordinary status. Fortunately, Bailey Hongzhuang was not a vengeful person. Now he was also full of gratitude to Bailey Hongzhuang. Under the circumstances at that time, if Bailey Hongzhuang was not willing to forgive him, this was also very normal. Pan Zimo's mood was also very good. Before participating in the assessment, he was looking forward to the day when he could enter Tiangang's sect. Now, this dream had really come true. Thinking of the various things he had in the dynasty a few days ago, he really felt that his hard work for such a long time was worth it. He also felt fortunate that he met Mo Yunjiwe and the others at that time. Otherwise, he was afraid that he might not have such a good result now. Cheng Hefeng and Yu Junfei were both disciples of Tiangang's sect. Cheng Hefeng was in the top 10. At that time, when he was choosing a sect, he chose Tiangang's sect. Speaking of which, all of this was really a coincidence. Except for Shi Cairong, the four of them had interacted with Bailey Hongzhuang before. As early as at the end of the assessment, when he saw the scene of Di Beichen and Bailey Hongzhuang hugging each other, Cheng Hefeng felt lucky that he didn't fall out with Bailey Hongzhuang at that time. Otherwise, in that case, he could only go to other sections. After all, if he offended the young sect master's wife, how could he have a good result if he stayed in the sect to cultivate? Originally, he didn't understand how Bailey Hongzhuang could become a sealing master with her strength. Now that he knew the identity of Bailey Hongzhuang, he completely understood. With Bailey Hongzhuang's identity, it wasn't strange for her to become a sealing master. Some of the geniuses in sects couldn't be judged by common sense. Even if they were of the same age, the cultivators in sects were usually much stronger than them. Yu Junfei didn't know what to say. He only felt that Fang Wensheng was right to die. If he didn't die in the hands of Bailey Hongzhuang, he would have died in the hands of the young sect master after the assessment. At this moment, he finally understood. Bailey Hongzhuang didn't participate in the assessment as a small Empire's team. They were clearly the same team as Han Shiling's team. They were only separated into two teams because of the conflict between the two parties. Probably many people didn't understand this point. It was because everyone didn't know that Bailey Hongzhuang and the others pretended to be pigs to eat tigers all the way until the end. They were simply too shrewd. Chapter 1794. Not long after, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others arrived at Tiangang Zone. Xia Jiqing and the others had already been to Tiangang Zone and were no stranger to the situation here. Cheng Hefeng and the others were obviously coming to Tiangang Zone for the first time, so they were full of curiosity and shock for everything in front of them. They had long heard of the vastness and extraordinariness of the sect, but imagination was always imagination. Only when they saw it with their own eyes would they know what a magnificent scene it was. Look, Bailey Hongzhuang's group of friends really became cultivators of our Tiangang Zone. They're also very powerful. None of them were injured, and all of them came back safely. Not only that, their rankings are very good. You really can't judge a book by its cover. The cultivators of Tiangang Zone looked at Xia Jiqing and the others. 2 years ago, they only thought that after Xia Jiqing and the others left, they would never come back alive. After all, they all understood the cruelty of the assessment competition. If they were not strong enough, they would only have a dead end if they participated. They were not optimistic about the strength of the Kanglan College's group of cultivators because the gap was too big. However, now that they saw them return safely, although everyone felt that it was a little difficult to accept, they still respected them a little more in their hearts. At least, compared to the time when they were completely relying on Bailey Hongzhuang's relationship to come here. Now they had proven that they did have the strength. For many cultivators, what they most disliked was to rely on relationships to get the status they had worked so hard for so long before, because this would make them have a strong sense of imbalance in their hearts. But if the other party also had the same strength, then they would not be so repulsed as before. The remarks of the surrounding cultivators were not missed by Xia Jiqing and the others. Compared to the remarks 2 years ago, the words they heard at the moment were undoubtedly more pleasing to the ears. Thinking of this, everyone smiled at each other. Sure enough, standing here with their own strength had a completely different experience. Now these guys don't dare to laugh at us anymore. Xia Jiqing's face was filled with a proud smile. When they first listened to the slander of other cultivators, they also had a breath of resentment in their hearts. Fortunately, now all of this had been solved. Dongfang Yu's peach blossom eyes curved into a charming arc. Why bother with what others say? Just be yourself. At this time, Di Beichen looked at Xiao Yingze and said, "Second elder, I'll have to trouble you to take them to the conference hall." The 4 hall masters should already be waiting. Hearing this, Xiao Ingzi respectfully bowed. Yes, then I will take them to the conference hall now. Di Beichen glanced at Bailey Hongzhuang with a smile. You can choose the branch palace that you want to cultivate. I will not accompany you there. Bailey Hongzhuang nodded slightly and smiled sweetly. I understand. Looking at Bailey Hongzhuang's bright smile, Di Beichen's eyes lit up. Even though he had been with Hongzhuang for such a long time, every time she smiled, he would be stunned. He thought that he had been poisoned by a poison called Hongzhuang. However, he was willing to endure it. Now everyone follow me to the conference hall. After leaving his sentence, Xiao Ingzi walked in the direction of the conference hall. Bailey Hongzhuang and the others also followed behind Xiao Ingzi. Chapter 1795. After Di Beichen left, Xia Jiqing went to Bailey Hongzhuang's side. However, because the second elder was in front and they were about to go to the conference hall, she did not dare to pull Hongzhuang to say anything else. After the report was completed, she could have a good chat with her boss about what had happened during this period of time. Gong Xiaoqing and the others followed closely behind Bailey Hongzhuang, while Cheng Huffing's group of 4 walked at the back. Seeing that Bailey Hongzhuang had such a good relationship with the cultivators in her team, they couldn't help but feel sad. The cultivators in her team were a group of extremely lucky guys. Under the leadership of the second elder, after walking for a while, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others also arrived at the conference hall. Xiao Ingzi knocked on the door of the conference hall. After hearing the sound coming from the door, he pushed open the door of the conference hall and walked in with the new disciples. In their line of sight, they saw the 4 palace masters sitting on the seats on both sides. With the appearance of Bailey Hongzhuang and the others, the eyes of the 4 palace masters fell on them. Feeling the eyes of the palace masters, Xia Jiqing and the others all held their breath and showed a serious look on their faces. The eyes of the 4 palace masters looked at everyone. This time, Tiangang sect had recruited 12 cultivators in the top 100 of the assessment competition. This number was already very good. After all, the strength of the top 10 sects was not weak. Most of the time, each sect had 10 people. This time, the young sect master personally came out, and the effect was really different. The second elder's voice sounded. The work of the great elder had now fallen on her. Tiangang sect is divided into 4 halls, namely Azure Dragon Hall, White Tiger Hall, Vermilion Bird Hall, and Black Tortoise Hall. This is the Azure Dragon Hall Master, Yin Kaicheng. This is the White Tiger Hall Master, Qi Ing'an. This is the Vermilion Bird Hall Master, Qin Ai. This is the Black Tortoise Hall Master, Gu Jingqing. The second elder introduced the identities of the 4 palace masters to the new disciples. All the disciples of Tiangang sect would cultivate in these 4 halls. The strength of the 4 halls was similar, and there was competition. In Tiangang sect, there would be a competition between the 4 halls every once in a while. With competition, there was motivation. This was also implemented in the sect. This was because once there was no competition, the cultivator would naturally not feel nervous and would gradually become lazy. Listening to the second elder's introduction, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others, one after another, they bowed and said, "Greetings to the 4 palace masters." Today, Bailey Hongzhuang was a lot more indifferent when facing the 4 palace lords. When she first met the 4 palace lords, she was still very worried. But now, this feeling had obviously disappeared. The Azure Dragon Hall Master Xiao Hongjin and the White Tiger Hall Master Jiang, he had already disappeared from the Tiangang sect. As for how the sovereign dealt with them, Bailey Hongzhuang did not ask. However, she only needed to know that their ending would definitely not be good. Yin Kaicheng and Qi Yinghan were the 2 palace masters chosen by the sect master. The strength and influence of these 2 people were very clear. Of course, these 2 people were completely on the sect master and young sect master side and did not have any disloyalty. Chapter 1796. The four palace masters were just sitting there, but everyone could feel a heavy pressure. That was the aura that belonged to a superior person. The momentum that was cultivated by being in a high position for many years was something that ordinary people could not possess. Therefore, when facing the four palace masters, they could not help but feel weak. There was a faint smile on the faces of the four palace masters. It just so happened that there were 12 disciples. Each of the four palace masters would get 3, so it was more fair. You have a total of 12 disciples here. Every 3 people will enter a palace. You can choose by yourselves. Once you have chosen, stand in front of us. Qin Ai's face was filled with a kind smile, and his voice was gentle and majestic. The cultivation of the top 100 in the assessment competition was very good. They were all good seedlings that could be cultivated well in each palace. Because the number of new disciples was relatively small, they still had to compete with each other. The current situation where the number of people could be divided equally was undoubtedly what they hoped for the most. After all, they were still hall masters. It would be unsightly for them to fight over outstanding seedlings to the point where their faces were flushed red, even though they were often like this in private. As Qin Ai's voice fell, Xia Jiqing and the others looked at each other. Obviously, this situation was somewhat beyond their expectations. You can discuss it. If you have a good relationship, you can enter a palace. Don't be too nervous. Yin Kaicheng smiled indifferently. The rankings of the cultivators in this assessment competition were very high. Therefore, they were not worried about who would join their palace. Xia Jiqing walked to Bailey Hongzhuang's side and said, "Boss, I will go to whichever palace you go to." In Xia Jiqing's heart, this kind of problem did not need her to consider at all. No matter which palace boss went to, she would follow. From the past to the present, she had never intended to be separated from boss. Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang smiled slightly. She knew that Jiqing would definitely be with her. As for which palace she would go to, she had also thought about it. She chose the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall. Not only her, but her grandfather and Di Bei-chun were also very much in agreement. Among the 4 palace masters, only Qin Ai and Gu Jingqing knew that she was her grandfather's granddaughter. The other 2 palace masters did not know. It wasn't that Tian didn't trust Yin Kaicheng and Qing Han, but the fewer people who knew about this, the better. Once more people knew about it, the possibility of the news being leaked would increase. Moreover, she would be going to Limitless Palace to cultivate 3 months later. If you were to cultivate under other palace masters, it would undoubtedly be extremely inconvenient. However, in the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall, this was clearly not a problem. After hearing Xia Jiqing's words, Bai Junyu also walked to Xia Jiqing's side and said, "Hongzhuang, Jiqing, I am in the same hall as you." Xia Jiqing subconsciously glanced at Bai Junyu. When she heard that Bai Junyu was going to cultivate in the same hall as her, she couldn't help but feel a little happy. At the very least, Bai Junyu did not choose to cultivate in the same place as Yuan Xiaoman, but chose to cultivate in the same place as her. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled at Bai Junyu. It seemed that Bai Junyu's feelings for Jiqing had not changed at all. After they cultivated together in the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall, it was time to break through this layer of window paper. Although this matter would make Xiaoman sad, Bailey Hongzhuang believed that Xiaoman would definitely find the happiness that truly belonged to her. Chapter 1797. When Yuan Xiaoman saw that Bai Junyu had chosen to cultivate in the same hall as Xia Jiqing, her eyes were filled with sadness. Did this mean that Xia Jiqing was always the one who occupied the most weight in Bai Junyu's heart? She and Jiqing were good friends, and she never had the idea of competing with Jiqing for a sweetheart. All the choices were Bai Junyu's. If Bai Junyu chose her, she would be happy. But if Bai Junyu chose Xia Jiqing, she would also give her blessings. No matter what, they were great friends. Yuan Jixin also noticed the change in Yuan Xiaoman's expression. He knew about Xiaoman's feelings for Bai Junyu. Although Yuan Xiaoman was usually carefree, as if she didn't care about anything, he and Xiaoman grew up together, so he knew that this was the first time Xiaoman liked someone. Thinking about it, the first time you liked someone but was rejected, this feeling must be very uncomfortable. As Xiaoman's brother, he could only comfort her. Yuan Jixin patted Yuan Xiaoman's shoulder, only hoping that she wouldn't be too sad because of this. At least, her brother had always been by her side. Feeling Yuan Jixin's care, Yuan Xiaoman pulled a smile on her face and shook her head at Yuan Jixin, indicating that she was fine. Because Yuan Jixin and Yuan Xiaoman would definitely cultivate together, and Gong Xiaoqing and Dong Fangyu, who had been good brothers for so many years, would naturally not be separated. Therefore, the grouping was quickly determined. Bailey Hongzhuang, Xia Jiqing, and Bai Junyu stood in front of Qin Ai together. Qin Ai smiled slightly. He had already known that Bailey Hongzhuang would come to his team. Not to mention Bailey Hongzhuang's identity as the granddaughter of the sovereign. Just the first place of the assessment, Bailey Hongzhuang came to the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall. He would definitely train her well. Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two bowed to Qin Ai. In the future, they would follow Hall Master Qin. Gong Xiaoqing, Dong Fangyu, and Pan Zimo stood in front of Yan Kaicheng. They chose the Azure Dragon Palace Hall. It just so happened that the three men were very suitable to cultivate in the Azure Dragon Palace Hall. Yuan Jixin, Yuan Xiaoman, and Dong Hongyan chose White Tiger Hall. Compared to Cheng Hefeng and the others, they were more familiar with Dong Hongyan. Although they once had a conflict with Dong Hongyan, all the conflicts had vanished in a thin air. Moreover, Dong Hongyan had helped them in the past, so they had a good impression of Dong Hongyan. Cheng Hefeng, Yu Junfei, and Shirt Cyrong remained in the Black Tortoise Hall. The four hall masters nodded their heads in satisfaction when they saw that everyone had quickly chosen their respective sub-halls. Today is everyone's first day of reporting. After confirming your respective training halls, there won't be any problems. Later, when you go to your respective branch halls, the elders will tell you where you will live in the future. Cultivate well in the branch halls, Yan Kaicheng said slowly. Yes, Bailey Hongzhuang replied. Although you have defeated many opponents to become a member of Tiangang sect, don't think that you can relax after coming here. Here, your cultivation life has just begun. If you don't cultivate well and improve, then you will also be eliminated by Tiangang sect. The results you obtained in the assessment competition are indeed very good. But here, there are countless cultivators who are more outstanding and more talented than you. Chapter 1798. The White Tiger Hall Master, Qiying Han, was more solemn. Every time a new disciple joined the Tiangang sect, he had to sound the alarm. After obtaining very good results in the assessment competition, these young people were bound to endure all kinds of flattery and fawning after returning home. In this way, many cultivators would lose their nature and think that they were outstanding enough. However, such thinking was absolutely not allowed in the Tiangang sect. The Tiangang sect itself was a place where the survival of the fittest prevailed. Compared to the environment these cultivators lived in previously, this place was even crueler. As long as one's strength was not strong enough, they would be the target of everyone's ridicule. He wanted to tell all the new disciples that in this place, they had to reign in their previous pride and complacency. In this place, they were newcomers who had nothing. Following Qiying Han's words, Gong Xiaoqing and the others' hearts all trembled. The original joy and pride in their hearts were shattered with these words. During this period of time, their hearts had indeed been somewhat complacent because of their recent results. At this moment, after hearing Qiying Han's words, they could not help but start to examine themselves. Even if they obtained good results in the assessment competition, they were probably at the bottom of the Tiangang sect. This was because many cultivators in the Tiangang sect were selected from the assessment competition. In addition, the previous cultivators had already stayed in the Tiangang sect to cultivate for such a long time. They really could not compare with the other party in any aspect. Understood. Everyone's faces were filled with seriousness. From now on, they had to let go of everything in the past and cultivate humbly and seriously. Qing Han's gaze swept across everyone. After seeing that everyone had an appearance of humbly accepting his teachings, he also revealed a satisfied expression. If the new disciples did not sound the alarm when they arrived at the sect, they would inevitably cause some trouble in the following period of time. They had all seen this before. Chapter 1799. After the four hall masters finished their speech, they stood up and left the assembly hall. Bailey Hongzhuang and the others also followed the palace lords they had chosen and walked out. Boss, we'll go White Tiger Hall first. When we have time, we'll come and find you. Yuan Xiaoman walked to Bailey Hongzhuang's side. She hadn't seen her boss for more than 2 months and originally wanted to talk to her more. She didn't expect that they were actually cultivating in different halls. Although they all belonged to Tiangang's sect, it wouldn't be so easy to see each other often in the future. Tiangang's sect's area was very large, and different halls were on different peaks. Although they could come and go, the distance wasn't close. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled slightly. The future is long. We'll all be in Tiangang's sect and have many opportunities to meet. Listening to Bailey Hongzhuang's words, Yuan Xiaoman also revealed a happy smile. Okay, although it's a pity that we can't cultivate in the same hall, but boss, I'll definitely work hard to cultivate. Bailey Hongzhuang nodded slightly. You can still see each other often. Come and find us often. Gong Xiaoqing and Dong Fangyu also looked at Bailey Hongzhuang. Dong Fangyu was as bright and handsome as ever. Hongzhuang, I wanted to ask you how you've been in Tiangang's sect during this period of time, but now there's no chance. Next time, let's find a chance to get together. Bailey Hongzhuang nodded and smiled faintly. No problem, just come and find us. Cheng Yifeng also couldn't help but look at Bailey Hongzhuang. In Tiangang's sect, Bailey Hongzhuang was really a doted existence. As early as the end of the assessment competition, Bailey Hongzhuang already knew that Cheng Yifeng and Yu Junfei were also Tiangang's sect's disciples. She also felt a wave of amazement towards this miraculous fate. Although she almost fought with Cheng Yifeng and Yu Junfei before, in the end, the conflict didn't develop to the maximum. Bailey Hongzhuang also had some admiration for Cheng Yifeng. After all, there were not many cultivators who were as smart and magnanimous as Cheng Yifeng. Being a smiling tiger was also one of his abilities. If it was an ordinary person, they wouldn't be able to do what Cheng Yifeng did. Cheng Yifeng smiled politely at Bailey Hongzhuang, as if nothing had happened during the assessment. As the saying goes, don't slap a smiling person. Cheng Yifeng had always been very thorough about this point. Seeing this, Bailey Hongzhuang also nodded. Now, they were all disciples of Tiangang's sect. Compared to the situation of absolute competition in the past, they were now in the same team. Therefore, there was no need for a tit-for-tat. When Yu Junfei saw Cheng Yifeng's reaction, he felt both jealousy and admiration. It had to be said that Cheng Yifeng's way of dealing with people was watertight. In this aspect, he could not compare to Cheng Yifeng. Soon, the four hall masters headed in 4 different directions. Bailey Hongzhuang, Xia Jiqing, and Bai Junyu followed behind Qin Ai and walked in the direction of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall. Although they had all been to Tiangang's sect, they hadn't been to the 4 main halls and didn't know what the situation was like. Bailey Hongzhuang had been staying in Tiangang's sect these days, but she hadn't been to other places except for Di Beichen's palace. Naturally, she didn't know where the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall was. Chapter 1800. Along the way, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 2 followed behind Qin Ai and looked at the environment of Tiangang's sect. Now it seemed that Tiangang's sect really had a different world. The size of the area was really amazing. Along the way, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 2 did not communicate. After all, they were very afraid of the palace master in front of them. In the process of going to Vermilion Bird Palace Hall, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other 2 also met a lot of disciples who were coming here. All the disciples would bow and greet Qin Ai when they saw him. However, Qin Ai still had an indifferent and amiable look on his face. The eyes of the crowd of disciples couldn't help but fall on Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two. Today was the day when the new disciples reported, and everyone was very familiar with the process. At this moment, looking at the situation, they knew that Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two would be cultivators of Vermilion Bird Palace Hall in the future. I didn't expect Bailey Hongzhuang to choose Vermilion Bird Palace Hall. Palace Master Qin's temper has always been very good. It's not strange that Bailey Hongzhuang came to Vermilion Bird Palace Hall. It seems that Bailey Hongzhuang did not use her privileges and intends to cultivate in Vermilion Bird Palace Hall. That's not necessarily true. We have to see Bailey Hongzhuang's performance later to know. I think that since Bailey Hongzhuang has been confirmed to be the future wife of the young sect master, she probably doesn't need to work so hard. As early as Bailey Hongzhuang had been staying in Di Beichen's palace, many disciples thought that Bailey Hongzhuang was likely to follow the young sect master to cultivate in the future and would not go to one of the four main halls to cultivate. Now looking at the situation in front of them, they knew that their previous guesses were wrong. The real situation was not like this. Xia Jiqing listened to everyone's discussion and could not help but frown. It seemed that everyone still had a lot of guesses and doubts about the boss. The speed of Qin Ai and Bailey Hongzhuang and the others was not slow. After a long while, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others finally arrived at Vermilion Bird Palace Hall. A huge palace appeared in front of Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two, magnificent and spectacular. At a glance, no one would think that this was just a side hall. My God, Vermilion Bird Palace Hall is so big. It's shocking. Xia Jiqing's face was filled with shock. She knew that Tiangang's sect had always been big, but the situation in front of her was a bit too amazing. Such a large hall was only one of the four main halls. Didn't this mean that the other three halls were also of the same size? I wouldn't have imagined it if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes. We'll be cultivating here in the future. It looks pretty good. The corner of Bai Junyu's mouth held a trace of a faint smile. When he first saw this Vermilion Bird Palace Hall, he had a feeling of yearning. Thinking that he would be cultivating here in the future, he couldn't help but feel happy. Bailey Hongzhuang also had some feelings in her heart. This was the heritage of the sect. Compared to 1,000 years ago, the sect today was undoubtedly more magnificent, giving people a sense of shock. In the center of this palace, there were three big words written in flamboyant calligraphy: Vermilion Bird Palace Hall. Although it was only 3 words, from these words, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two could feel an indescribable sense of sharpness. There was sword intent condensed in these words. After staring at these words for a long time, they only felt a pain in their eyes and could not continue to look at it. After seeing the reaction of Bailey Hongzhuang and the others, Qin Ai also introduced it. Chapter 1801. Listening to Qin Ai's words, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two's eyes were filled with shock. The first sect master of Tiangang's sect. Tiangang's sect had been passed down for many years, and the first sect master existed many years ago. However, those who were the first to establish a sect were usually the most talented people. To open up a sect in an environment where there were so many sects, the process was definitely difficult and not simple. The first sect master's swordsmanship must be extremely powerful. Bailey Hongzhuang sighed. How much understanding of the sword did he have to be able to integrate the sword intent into the words? Qin Ai smiled and nodded. Her expression was full of admiration and reverence. The first sect master's swordsmanship was indeed superb, and no one could compare to him. Even in the history books of Tiangang's sect, it was recorded that the first sect master's swordsmanship was fierce. The reason why the first sect master was able to open up the sect was because of his swordsmanship. Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two also showed admiration. If there was no first sect master, then there would not be the current Tiangang sect. In the sect, many disciples who practice swordsmanship often come to look at this plaque and comprehend the sword intent in the words. Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang was a little surprised. We can rely on these words to comprehend the sword intent. Yes, the first sect master integrated the sword intent into the words in order to let the disciples of the sect benefit infinitely. In this way, any cultivator who practices swordsmanship can comprehend from these words. 100 years ago, there was a disciple who understood the sword intent in the words of my Tiangang sect. His swordsmanship was unparalleled among the younger generation of cultivators. He got the true inheritance of the first sect master. With Qin AI's voice falling, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two's eyes looking at the plaque had changed. They never thought that the words in the plaque turned out to be a kind of inheritance. It was really unexpected. Xia Jiqing and Bai Junyu didn't know what to say at the moment. They always felt that after coming to Tiangang's sect, they had a feeling of being country people entering a city. Everything here showed a strong and deep foundation. There was not a single thing they could casually ignore. After noticing the expressions of Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two, the smile in Qin AI's eyes deepened. She said, "After you have stayed in Tiangang's sect for a long time, you will know all of this. Now, report to the resource elder." Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two looked in the direction that Qin AI was pointing at and noticed that there was an elder not far away. "Thank you, Palace Master." Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two thanked Qin AI for her guidance. Naturally, the Hall Master would not be in charge of their living arrangements. It was already an honor for the Palace Master to lead them to the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall on the first day of reporting. It should be known that it was extremely difficult for cultivators to meet the Palace Master. As long as nothing major happened in the sub-palace, the Palace Master would not appear. Qin AI slowly disappeared from the sight of Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two. Only then did they turn around and walk towards the resource elder. "Greetings to the elder." Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two respectfully bowed. "We are the new disciples who came to report today." The elder then looked at Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two. After noticing Bailey Hongzhuang, his eyes changed a bit, and then he smiled. Chapter 1802. The key to your room, the disciple uniform, and the sect manual are all in the Chinquan bag. You can take a look at it yourself. The place where the disciples of Vermilion Bird Palace Hall live. After you enter the hall, turn left, and each room has a number written on it. All you need to do is to enter your own house according to the house number. If there is still something you don't understand, come and ask me." The resource elder said aloud. Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two took the Chinquan bag and immediately knew the room they lived in. "Thank you, elder." Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two bowed again. As far as they were concerned, there was nothing they didn't understand. The elder nodded slightly, and Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two left. The inside of Vermilion Bird Palace Hall was also very bright. Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two went to the left according to the elder's instructions. The scope of Vermilion Bird Palace Hall was very large. When Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two walked to the place where the disciples lived, they found that the number of rooms here was really not small. Not long after, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two found their respective rooms. Fortunately, because the three of them came to Vermilion Bird Palace Hall to report together, their rooms were also adjacent. Haha, our rooms are connected. It will be convenient in the future. Xia Jiqing's face was full of excitement. She had made up her mind to be together with the boss. If they lived far away, or if they didn't practice together, it would undoubtedly make her depressed. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled. "This feeling is similar to when we were in Azure Water College." Thinking back to when they were in Azure Water College, the three of them also lived on the first floor of the special enrollment dormitory. Now, the situation was exactly the same and had not changed. Hearing this, Xia Jiqing and Bai Junyu looked at each other and smiled. After Hongzhuang said this, they really felt that the situation was very similar. Bailey Hongzhuang opened the door and saw that the room also had everything and the treatment was very good. Compared to the living environment in Azure Water College, it seemed to be better here. No wonder so many cultivators are racking their brains to enter the sect. This treatment is indeed excellent. Bai Junyu sighed faintly. Living here was the dream life of many cultivators. We'll be living here for a long time in the future. The environment is pretty good. Bailey Hongzhuang raised her eyebrows and smiled. This place was spacious enough for her to place an alchemy furnace or draw inscriptions. In comparison, the dormitory of the Azure Water School was not as big as this one. As for some daily necessities, they had already prepared them in their Chinquan bags, so they only needed to tidy up a little before they could move in. Xia Jiqing did not enter her room, but followed Bailey Hongzhuang into her room. "Boss, how have you been in Tiangang's sect these days?" Xia Jiqing asked with concern. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled faintly. "I'm doing pretty well here, just like you guys." To her now, Tiangang's sect was her home. That was because her grandfather was here. Her grandfather was the only relative she had found in the world. Xia Jiqing, who was still a little worried, couldn't help but feel relieved after hearing Bailey Hongzhuang's words. "The Great Elder didn't embarrass you? I always feel that the Great Elder is not easy to deal with." Chapter 1803. Feeling Xia Jiqing's concern for her, Bailey Hongzhuang couldn't help but hold Xia Jiqing's hand. Her beautiful face was filled with a gentle and touched smile. "On the first day I came to Tiangang's sect, the Great Elder did come to trouble me." As soon as these words came out, Xia Jiqing couldn't help but show a nervous look. "I said that the Great Elder is not an easy person to deal with. He will definitely come to trouble you. Don't worry, the Great Elder is now in confinement. Otherwise, what you saw just now would not be the Second Elder, but the Great Elder." Xia Jiqing frowned, and there was a bit of joy in her eyes, but more of it was astonishment. "The Great Elder is in confinement? Did the young sect master do it?" Bailey Hongzhuang shook her head slightly. "The sect master ordered it. It is estimated that he will not come out in a short time, so you don't need to worry." Xia Jiqing's expression tightened, and she approached Bailey Hongzhuang, her eyes full of curiosity and joy. "Boss, has the sect master already agreed to you and the young sect master being together? Anyway, now that Han Shilling is gone, no one is your competitor. The young sect master likes you so much, the sect master should not object anymore, right?" Since the fall of Han Shilling, Xia Jiqing felt that the path of the boss was much smoother. After all, Han Shilling was a big stumbling block. What's more, the sect master's attitude towards the boss was also good. Obviously, there was no dissatisfaction. The sect master did not object. Bailey Hongzhuang nodded. Now her grandfather was very satisfied with her and Beichen together and only hoped that they could get married soon. Whether it was her, Beichen, or her grandfather, they all decided to hold the wedding after they rescued their parents. "That's great." Xia Jiqing was overjoyed. This was undoubtedly excellent news. Now that the Great Elder is in confinement, there is no way to destroy you and the young sect master. It seems that it won't be long before the boss becomes the young sect master's wife. Looking at Xia Jiqing's happy appearance, Bailey Hongzhuang couldn't help but smile. Now, there were no obstacles between her and Beichen. Compared to the heaviness when she first came to Tiangang's sect, the current result was undoubtedly much better. There were still 2 hurdles in front of them that needed to be crossed. She hoped that everything could be crossed like this, one by one. Bailey Hongzhuang then looked at Xia Jiqing. There was no problem between her and Beichen now, but the problem between Jiqing and Junyu seemed to have not been resolved. "How are you and Junyu now?" Bailey Hongzhuang asked. As Bailey Hongzhuang's voice fell, Xia Jiqing's expression, which was originally full of joy, suddenly stiffened and fell into silence. Seeing this, Bailey Hongzhuang understood. She sighed. Bai Junyu and Xia Jiqing were usually talkative people, but when it came to this kind of thing, the two of them could only remain silent. In this regard, she also felt a burst of helplessness. After a long while, Xia Jiqing's voice lowered a bit and said, "Junyu, he should like Xiaoman." She always felt that Bai Junyu and Yuan Xiaoman would have a lot of common topics together, and they would be more comfortable getting along. Yuan Xiaoman was a person who couldn't hide her thoughts on her face. Everyone could see that she liked Bai Junyu. Now, she only felt that she might be an obstacle between them. Chapter 1804. Bailey Hongzhuang looked at Xia Jiqing's lost appearance and couldn't help but feel distressed. When they were at the Kingland College, Xia Jiqing obviously didn't have any thoughts about Bai Junyu. However, after getting along for such a long time, she felt that Xia Jiqing had gradually begun to like Bai Junyu. Women understood women's minds more. Not to mention, she and Jiqing had been sisters for several years, and she was also very familiar with the changes in Jiqing's mood. Since Junyu chose to cultivate with us in the same hall, it proves that the person in his heart is you. Don't belittle yourself. Bailey Hongzhuang said, men's thoughts have always been very simple. If Bai Junyu liked Yuan Xiaoman, then Bai Junyu would definitely choose to be in a group with Yuan Xiaoman, not with them. Bai Junyu's thoughts have been proven by his actions. Xia Jiqing shook her head. Even if he chooses to cultivate with us in the same hall, it doesn't necessarily prove that he has me in his heart. On weekdays, he clearly prefers to get along with Xiaoman. These days, she had been paying attention. When Bai Junyu was with her, he clearly didn't talk as much as he did with Yuan Xiaoman, and they got along more naturally. It was precisely because of this that she became more and more unconfident. In fact, Xiaoman's appearance was outstanding, and her family background and strength were better than hers. It was normal for Bai Junyu to like Yuan Xiaoman. Seeing that Xia Jiqing had been changing the topic, Bailey Hongzhuang couldn't help but frown. Jiqing, don't always deny Junyu's feelings for you, and always think that Junyu's approach to Xiaoman is true. If you continue to do this, you will only become more and more unconfident. Think about it carefully. Isn't Junyu more special to you? Bailey Hongzhuang felt a burst of helplessness. Whenever a woman really liked a man, she would often become like this. Xia Jiqing clearly didn't believe her. Xia Jiqing shook her head, inexplicably irritated. Now she increasingly felt that Bai Junyu didn't like her. However, immersed in such a mood, her mood was also very bad. You only see Junyu and Xiaoman chatting well. Why don't you say that you also chat well with Dongfang? However, once you're in front of Junyu, you don't know what to say. Junyu is very likely to be in the same situation as you. Bailey Hongzhuang sighed faintly. At times like this, many onlookers could see more clearly. It was precisely because they were just friends that they got along so well that there was no need to worry about other problems. And once you stand in front of the person you like, you will unconsciously feel nervous, worrying about how you should behave so that the other party won't hate you, so that the other party will have a better impression of you. Because most of his emotions were immersed in this place, he would be particularly passive when interacting with others, and he would speak less. In her opinion, Xia Jiqing and Bai Junyu belonged to such a situation. As long as this window paper was not broken, this problem would continue to exist. She really admired the endurance of Bai Junyu, Xia Jiqing, and Yuan Xiaoman. Struggling under such circumstances was an extremely uncomfortable feeling. Yet, they were able to continue walking like this. Listening to Bailey Hongzhuang's words, Xia Jiqing was shocked. Chapter 1805. If this was the case, then did it mean that the person Bai Junyu liked was still her? Xia Jiqing's heart couldn't help but beat faster. During this time, she felt more and more that Bai Junyu and Yuan Xiaoman were a real couple. Sometimes she even wanted to quit. However, Bai Junyu often appeared in front of her, and she couldn't just let it go. It had been 3 years since she knew Bai Junyu. Since they met at the Kingland College, Bai Junyu had always been by her side. She clearly remembered the scene of the first time she met Bai Junyu. She still remembered Bai Junyu's expression at that time. It was just that, unknowingly, things had come to this. She didn't know when things began to develop like this, but the current situation was really not what she wanted to see. Noticing the change in Xia Jiqing's expression, Bailey Hongzhuang knew that she had understood a little. All of this depended on Bai Junyu's thoughts. Now that Yuan Xiaoman was not in the White Tiger Hall, If Bai Junyu still did not take any action, then she had to talk to Bai Junyu. Originally, she didn't want to intervene too much, so she didn't say much. If the situation had reached a situation where she had to say something, then for the happiness of her good sister, she decided to say something. In this way, whether it was for Xia Jiqing or Yuan Xiaoman, it was excellent. Bailey Hongzhuang patted Xia Jiqing's shoulder and said, "Think about it." Xia Jiqing looked deeply at Bailey Hongzhuang, then nodded. "Okay." Bailey Hongzhuang smiled slightly, then picked up the sect manual and looked at it. It recorded their cultivation process and what they needed to do in the Vermilion Bird Hall. Only after understanding all this, they knew what to do next. Bailey Hongzhuang carefully looked at everything recorded in the manual. After 3 days, they could go to the martial arts field of the Vermilion Bird Hall to cultivate in the morning. In Tiangang's sect, the activities of the cultivators were relatively free. The martial arts field was divided into 2 parts. One was the sitting area, and the other was the martial arts field. The meditation field was the place where the disciples cultivated together, while the martial arts field was the place where the cultivators exchanged pointers and practiced their martial skills. Normally, most of the cultivators would cultivate in the cultivation field, because the cultivation fields of the 4 major branch palaces all had a special barrier. Cultivating there, the essence energy would be denser, and the cultivator's strength would also increase faster. Similarly, the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall also had 2 rankings. One was the cultivation ranking, which recorded the cultivation of all the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall disciples. One was the combat prowess ranking, which recorded the combat prowess of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall disciples. Cultivation and combat strength were not the same. Even among cultivators of the same cultivation, there would be a certain difference in combat strength. These 2 lists were usually placed on the training field, and anyone who came here would be able to see them. It was precisely because of this that the cultivators at the bottom would definitely feel humiliated. This method could also promote the cultivation of the disciples. After all, when everyone around you was working hard to cultivate while you were the only one who remained stagnant, even you would feel ashamed of yourself. Looking at these 2 lists, cultivators would clearly know their ranking in the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall. Chapter 1806. In addition, in Tiangang's sect, there was a place to receive cultivation resources called the Resource Hall. Every month, cultivators could go to the Resource Hall to receive their own resources. These cultivation resources were often resources such as medicinal pills. With these resources, a cultivator's cultivation speed would be much faster than usual. The reason why all the cultivators in Shengxian continent wanted to become a member of the sect was because of the rich spirit energy here. Cultivating in the rich spirit energy would have twice the result with half the effort. Unknowingly, one could surpass the cultivation of the cultivators in the outside world. On the other hand, it was because of the rich cultivation resources in the sect. As everyone knew, medicinal pills had always been a necessity for cultivators. However, the price of medicinal pills was also very expensive. Except for some extremely rich cultivators, it was impossible for the average person to have so many cultivation resources. What's more, the alchemists in the outside world were not as good as the alchemists in the sect. In the outside world, many medicinal pills were priceless. Even if one had money, they could not buy the medicinal pills they needed. As for the rules here, they did not have to abide by many. Some places they should not go, such as the Sect Master's Palace, the Junior Sect Master's Palace, the Palace Master's Palace, and so on. As long as they did not receive an order, the conference hall was also a place they could not set foot in. In Tiangang's sect, in addition to the 4 halls, there was also the Alchemy Hall and the Inscription Hall. The number of alchemist disciples in the Alchemy Hall was also not small, and the treatment of the disciples in the Inscription Hall was even better. However, the number of disciples in the Inscription Hall was much less than the number of disciples in the Alchemy Hall. This was because the requirements to become an inscription master were higher than that of an alchemist. Here, the status of both the Alchemy Hall disciples and the Inscription Hall disciples was very high. However, the status of the disciples in the four halls was not bad. However, the rarer something was, the more valuable it was. This law was applicable everywhere. When Bailey Hongzhuang was looking at the sect manual, Xia Jiqing also looked at it. After understanding all this, she felt that everything here was more free. Even if they were not in the same hall, they could often go there on weekdays. Tiangang's sect was to give them a place to cultivate freely. As long as there was nothing major, the hall master would generally not come forward. It was a free-range guide. Boss, I heard from the hall master that there will be other new disciples coming to Tiangang's sect in a few days. Xia Jiqing looked at Bailey Hongzhuang suspiciously. She thought it was just them. She didn't expect there to be other cultivators. Bailey Hongzhuang nodded slightly. The scope of Tiangang's sect is so large. Although the requirements for the disciples recruited each year are high, the number of people is not too small. The assessment competition was only one way for Tiangang's sect to recruit disciples, and there were other ways. Some disciples from aristocratic families would also come to the sect to cultivate, but these disciples would not be the most outstanding disciples of the aristocratic families. Maybe it was because they couldn't get the best treatment in their families, so they came to the sect to cultivate. If they achieve outstanding results in the sect, then when they return to their family, their status will also rise by a lot. Chapter 1807. I didn't expect the pressure of the cultivators in the aristocratic families to be so big. I thought that the disciples of aristocratic families were very great. Xia Jiqing sighed faintly. It seemed that no matter who it was, they would have some troubles. She used to think that the children of aristocratic families were born with a golden spoon in their mouths. They would live a life of luxury and were not comparable to ordinary people. Now, listening to her boss's explanation, she only felt that what she thought before was too simple. Everything was not so easy. Bailey Hongzhuang shook her head. It is precisely because their resources are beyond the reach of others that the family's requirements for them are higher. In a cultivation aristocratic family, there would be many cultivators in the younger generation. Under the accumulation of rich and excellent resources, almost every generation would have amazing talents. On the contrary, under the same cultivation resources, the return of some children was not proportional to their efforts. Then the situation of these disciples was undoubtedly extremely bad. The bigger the family, the crueler it was. Xia Jiqing nodded slightly. The strength of those aristocratic family disciples should be stronger than us. I feel that if I don't work hard, I am afraid that I will really be at the bottom. Even if the performance of the aristocratic family disciples who came to Tiangang's sect was not outstanding, compared to the cultivators who came from the grassroots, their strength should be stronger. Bailey Hongzhuang thought for a moment and said, "It is not so absolute, but we do need to work hard. The palace lord is right. Coming to Tiangang's sect is just a starting point. What kind of results we have in the future will depend on ourselves." Xia Jiqing's eyes changed a bit. She had rested for 3 months and could be said to be extremely relaxed. However, today was only the first day in Tiangang's sect, and she felt an indescribable sense of tension. This feeling was as if there was a flood beast chasing after her. As long as she slacked a little, she may be swallowed into the stomach. She did not dare to not work hard. She had to work hard because she did not want to be at the bottom. Looking at Xia Jiqing's dignified expression, Bailey Hongzhuang patted her shoulder and said, "Jiqing, don't be so nervous. Your performance in the assessment competition is very good. Not to mention your talent is not bad, and your strength has improved very quickly. Back then, we also came here one by one when no one was optimistic about us. Now, the gap between us and the other cultivators is not that big. Do you still not have confidence?" After hearing Bailey Hongzhuang's words, Xia Jiqing, who was originally a little tense, also relaxed a little. "Boss, you're right. I'll definitely work hard." Bailey Hongzhuang smiled. "I just reported in today, so I don't have much to do. Why don't we go to the resource hall to collect cultivation resources?" Obtaining cultivation resources would definitely be beneficial to their cultivation. Sure, Xia Jiqing nodded. She was also very curious about what kind of cultivation resources the Tiangang Zone disciples would have. Just as Bailey Hongzhuang and Xia Jiqing were about to leave, Bai Junyu's voice came from outside their door. Jiqing, Hongzhuang, do you want to go to the resource hall to collect cultivation resources? Hearing this voice, Bailey Hongzhuang and Xia Jiqing looked at each other and smiled. They immediately opened the door and went out. Chapter 1808. Bai Junyu looked at Xia Jiqing's beautiful smile and couldn't help but be stunned for a moment. He always felt that the Jiqing in front of him at this moment was very different. From the end of the assessment until now, he had not seen Jiqing smile so happily for a long time. Recalling all the things in the past at this moment, when he saw Xia Jiqing speak to him so brightly, his heart was filled with emotion. He only hoped that he could often see Xia Jiqing smile like this in the future. Xia Jiqing saw Bai Junyu staring at her, and her pretty face couldn't help but blush. She said, "What are you looking at me for?" Bai Junyu was stunned, and then he retracted his gaze. He touched his forehead and said, "No, nothing." Bailey Hongzhuang looked at Xia Jiqing and Bai Junyu in front of her, and the smile in her eyes deepened. Bai Junyu and Xia Jiqing like this. If someone said that they didn't like each other, no one would believe it. Let's go. I think Dongfang and the others should be going to the resource hall to get resources now. Bailey Hongzhuang said with a smile. With the voice of Bailey Hongzhuang falling, Bai Junyu and Xia Jiqing both nodded. The two immediately followed Bailey Hongzhuang in the direction of the resource hall. The resource hall was in the center of the four major halls, and there was a certain distance to get there. Today, they had just become cultivators of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall, and the three of them were in a very good mood. At this moment, walking on the road of Tiangang sect, the three of them had a happy smile on their faces. In the process of going to the resource hall, suddenly a voice came into the ears of Bailey Hongzhuang and the others. "Look, isn't that the future wife of the young master?" "That's right. Who are the man and woman behind her?" "They are all friends of Miss Bailey, and now they have become disciples of the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall." "In this way, doesn't it mean that they are our junior brothers and sisters?" "That's natural. The woman in the green dress is very beautiful. At first glance, I have a good impression of her." A man's eyes stopped on Xia Jiqing's body, his face full of excitement and love. Xia Jiqing's appearance was very delicate and pretty. After 2 years of experience in the assessment competition, her delicate and pretty face had a trace of heroic spirit, and she was even more beautiful. What's more, Xia Jiqing's figure was excellent and curvy. Even in the entire Tiangang Zone, there were very few women with a hot body like Xia Jiqing. Bailey Hongzhuang is the young sect master's woman, and now the entire Tiangang sect does not dare to have any thoughts about her. However, the new female disciples had always been the focus of the male disciples. "Not bad. This woman's looks are indeed outstanding. You have good eyesight." A male disciple kept looking at Xia Jiqing. His eyes were filled with excitement, as if he couldn't wait to come up and greet Xia Jiqing. However, after pondering for a long time, he ultimately did not walk up. This movement was not small. The man may have deliberately attracted Xia Jiqing's attention, so his voice was not hidden at all. Bailey Hongzhuang and the others heard this conversation clearly. Seeing this, Bailey Hongzhuang's lips could not help but evoke a smile. Jiqing's appearance was very outstanding, and there would be many disciples pursuing her in Tiangang sect. Chapter 1809. For a long time, Xia Jiqing had been following Bailey Hongzhuang. The men they met would be attracted by Bailey Hongzhuang at a glance, and few people would pay attention to her. After all, the boss was really too good. No matter when, he attracted everyone's attention like the sun. She never thought that there would be other people paying attention to her now, which really surprised her. However, in addition to being surprised, she also felt a trace of joy. At least, there were still people paying attention to her. During this time, she had been belittling herself, only thinking that she might be an ugly duckling. Today, after a conversation with the boss, coupled with the current scene, she only felt a little more confident in herself. Compared to Xia Jiqing's happiness, Bai Junyu's face was gloomy. Now that Xia Jiqing was getting more and more beautiful, more and more people were paying attention to her. However, he had been stagnant, and there was a sense of insecurity in his heart. If he continued to delay like this, would Jiqing be chased by other men? At the thought of this, Bai Junyu's face was ugly. This was not the situation he wanted to see. He thought that this time he could cultivate with Xia Jiqing in the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall. He could shorten the distance between them. But now it seemed that in this Vermilion Bird Palace Hall, his opponents were not few. It seemed that he had to hurry up and act. Bailey Hongzhuang casually looked back and saw Bai Junyu's gloomy face, and the smile in her eyes became more and more intense. It seemed that there was no need for her to communicate with Bai Junyu, and they could solve this matter by themselves. After walking for a while, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two finally successfully arrived at the Resource Palace Hall. The Resource Palace Hall was also a palace. It was divided into 3 floors and looked very solemn and noble. Every layout showed the heritage, and people did not dare to be too casual. Seeing this scene, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two could not help but feel a little emotional again. Every place in Tiangang sect gave them a feeling of extreme amazement. This kind of big spending, they could only see it in the sect. Just as Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two were about to go in, a familiar voice sounded behind them. Hongzhuang, you've also come to the resource hall. Hearing this voice, even without looking back, Bailey Hongzhuang and the others knew that Dongfang Yu and Gong Xiaoqing had arrived. The 3 of them turned around and saw Gong Xiaoqing, Dongfang Yu, and Pan Zimo walking over together. Pan Zimo clearly got along very well with Gong Xiaoqing and Dongfang Yu. After all, they had helped each other during the exam. Coincidentally, we don't have anything to do today. Naturally, we're here to collect resources from the resource room, Bailey Hongzhuang said with a smile. How do you feel in the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall? Gong Xiaoqing asked in a deep voice. Xia Jiqing smiled slightly. When I first saw the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall, I was quite shocked. However, I see that this Tiangang sect restrictions on their disciples are not very strong. In the future, we can still often interact. Dongfang Yu chuckled. When we first saw the Azure Dragon Palace, we were also shocked. The entire palace was azure in color, as if it was a coiling azure dragon. It really isn't simple. Just as Dongfang Yu had said, the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall, where Bailey Hongzhuang and the others were in, was completely red, representing the flames of the vermilion bird. Chapter 1810. Everyone looked at each other and smiled. Although they did not cultivate in the same hall, at least they were all in Tiangang sect. There were not many restrictions on the disciples here, and it was very simple for them to get together on weekdays. Although there was some distance for them as cultivators, it was not a distance at all. I have long heard that the cultivation resources of Tiangang sect disciples are very rich. Today, I can finally come and see it. Pan Zimo smiled. Tiangang sect was a place he had been yearning for a long time. Today, he could finally become a member here. He had not yet woken up from such a surprise. Listening to Pan Zimo's words, everyone's face was filled with a touch of expectation. Let's go in. Bailey Hongzhuang noticed the joy and eagerness on everyone's faces and immediately said. Everyone nodded and then walked into the resource hall. There were many disciples in the resource hall. Today was the beginning of the month, and the beginning of each month was the day when the cultivation resources were distributed. Therefore, the disciples of Tiangang sect would come to receive the resources these days. As Bailey Hongzhuang and the others walked into the resource hall, they saw that the entire resource hall was very bright. Looking carefully, they found that the resource hall was also divided into several areas. At first glance, Bailey Hongzhuang saw the resource room of Zhuke Palace Hall. Dong Fengyu and others naturally noticed this situation, and there was a touch of surprise in their eyes. It seems that the disciples of each branch hall will receive cultivation resources in their respective areas. In their line of sight, there were not only the resource rooms of the 4 branches, but also the resource rooms of the Alchemy Palace and the Inscription Palace. This simple appearance gave people a clear feeling at a glance, and they could not help but have a good impression of it. This was the large sect they yearned for. No matter where it was orderly. I don't know if the cultivation resources of each branch hall will be different. Xia Jiqing's eyes flashed with a curious light. Although the 4 branches of Tiangang sect all belonged to Tiangang sect, everything was separated. Gong Xiaoqing's handsome face was filled with wisdom. The cultivation resources should not be different. They were all new disciples, and it was reasonable to say that the things they were allocated should be the same. Hearing this, Xia Jiqing nodded. It should be so. I'm just a little curious. Let's not stand here in a daze. Let's take our cultivation resources first. Dong Fengyu smiled. Just as Bailey Hongzhuang and the others were about to go to their respective resource rooms to receive resources, a familiar and joyful voice entered their ears. Boss, you're all here. Glancing to the side, he saw Yuan Xiaoman, Yuan Jixin, and Dong Hongyun walking out of the White Tiger Hall's resource room. You've already received your cultivation resources. That's quite fast. Dong Fengyu also greeted them. Bailey Hongzhuang smiled. That's right. We're all here to collect cultivation resources. Yuan Xiaoman walked in front of Bailey Hongzhuang. Her charming face was filled with amazement. Boss, Tiangang sect reputation is really not just for show. I finally understand why the strength of the sect's disciples is so amazing. Their cultivation resources are much richer than the outside world. Chapter 1811. These cultivation resources, she usually couldn't have so much in a year, but in Tiangang sect, it was only a month's worth of cultivation resources for cultivators. With so many cultivation resources, coupled with the yuan li here that was richer than the outside world, it was impossible for the strength of the cultivators to not improve faster than the cultivators in the outside world. In the past, she always heard that whether it was a cultivator from a sect or an aristocratic family, the reason why they could have such impressive strength at such a young age was that they were completely piled up with resources. She had never understood what it meant to be stacked with cultivation resources. Now that she had come to Tiangang sect, she completely understood. They were currently just new disciples of Tiangang sect, but they already had so many cultivation resources. If they performed well in the White Tiger Hall in the future, these cultivation resources may even rise, which was too terrifying. At this moment, she finally understood why the genius cultivators in the aristocratic families were able to look down on others at such a young age. This was not entirely because their cultivation talent was outstanding, but more because of their generous conditions. She believed that even with her talent, if she was from a cultivation family, her strength would be extremely powerful now. Listening to Yuan Xiaoman's words, Bailey Hongzhuang smiled slightly. Yes, it is because of this that there are so many cultivators who want to enter the sect. Xiaoman, I was originally curious about how many cultivation resources there are, but now listening to you, I'm even more looking forward to it. Xia Jiqing's face was full of excitement. It seemed that the cultivation resources were really rich to the point of being surprising. Haha, then you go and get the cultivation resources first. Yuan Xiaoman chuckled. Bailey Hongzhuang and Xia Jiqing looked at each other, then walked in the direction of the Vermilion Bird Hall. Gong Xiaoqing and the other two no longer stayed and immediately went to the resource room of the Azure Dragon Hall. Yuan Xiaoman, Yuan Jixin, and Dong Hongyun walked out of the resource hall and waited for everyone outside. At this moment, there were many cultivators in the resource hall. If they all stood in the resource room, wouldn't it be very troublesome? Soon, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two arrived at the Vermilion Bird Palace Hall's resource room. An elder was standing there. When he saw Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two appear, he said, "Give me your identity medallions." Earlier, Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two had obtained identity badges from the Qinquan bag from the resource elder of the White Tiger Palace. After hearing the elder's words, they immediately took out their identity badges. Bailey Hongzhuang handed her ID card to the elder. After checking the information on the ID card, the elder said, "New disciple." "Yes." Bailey Hongzhuang smiled faintly. The elder then recorded Bailey Hongzhuang's information in his handbook. After that, he said to Bailey Hongzhuang, "Go to the back and get the cultivation resources." As the elder's voice fell, a disciple behind the elder showed a respectful smile to Bailey Hongzhuang. "Junior Sister Bailey, please come with me to get the cultivation resources." Bailey Hongzhuang nodded slightly and followed the disciple to the back of the resource room. Xia Jiqing and Bai Junyu also handed their identity medallions to the elder, and the elder recorded their information. Chapter 1812. Soon, Bailey Hongzhuang had already received her own cultivation resources. The disciple's attitude towards Bailey Hongzhuang was simply respectful to the point that it couldn't be more respectful. He was polite everywhere, as if Bailey Hongzhuang was not his junior sister, but an elder. In this regard, Bailey Hongzhuang also understood that the other party was polite to her because of her relationship with Di Beiqin. Now in the entire Tiangang sect, almost no one did not know the relationship between her and Di Beiqin. Along the way, almost all the cultivators were respectful to her. She felt a little helpless about this situation. After all, she originally did not come to Tiangang's sect with such an idea. However, thinking about it carefully, there was nothing bad about this. With this identity, there would be very few cultivators who would dare to find trouble with her, so she could cultivate in peace. During the assessment, there were countless people who found trouble with her, so it was good to be able to have some peace now. Xia Jiqing and Bai Junyu also quickly received their cultivation resources and appeared behind Bailey Hongzhuang. "Boss, we have already received our cultivation resources. Let's go back now." Hearing this, Bailey Hongzhuang nodded slightly. "Let's go out, Xiaoman and the others are still waiting for us outside." When Bailey Hongzhuang and the other two walked out of the resource hall, Dongfang Yu and the other two also walked out. Yuan Xiaoman could not help but walk to Xia Jiqing's side and said with a smile, "Jiqing, let's see if our cultivation resources are the same." "Okay." Xia Jiqing chuckled and immediately compared herself with Yuan Xiaoman. Through this comparison, the two found that their cultivation resources were exactly the same, and there was no difference. "Sure enough, it's the same." Xia Jiqing sighed, and her eyes fell on Gong Shaoqing. "Shaoqing, what you said is really right." Dong Hongyan could not help but frown. Since everyone will receive the same amount of cultivation resources, then why do we have to separate the different palaces? Isn't this superfluous? If everyone received the same amount of resources, then the resource rooms of the 4 sub-halls could be integrated together. Dongfang Yu and the others looked at each other as doubts surfaced in their eyes. They couldn't understand this either. However, since Tiangang's sect made such an arrangement, they must have their reasons. Every branch hall receives different cultivation resources, but because you're all new disciples, the cultivation resources you receive are the same. A low and magnetic voice rang out behind Bailey Hongzhuang. Di Beiqin's face was filled with a handsome and sunny smile. Seeing the appearance of Di Beiqin, Xia Jiqing and the others were stunned for a moment. Obviously, they didn't expect that Di Beiqin would appear at this moment. Bailey Hongzhuang was also a little surprised. Di Beiqin did not tell her that he would be here. What's more, they had only been in the resource hall for a short time. How did Di Beiqin know that she would be here? Bailey Hongzhuang stared at Di Beiqin, and her dark eyes were filled with doubt. Di Beiqin noticed Bailey Hongzhuang's puzzled look and felt helpless. He knew that it was not appropriate for him to accompany Hongzhuang to the Vermilion Bird Hall. What's more, the four temple masters had to explain some things to the new disciples. If he was there, it would undoubtedly have some impact. Chapter 1813. Earlier on, he had already told Hong Zhuang that she would go to the palace to look for him after she had settled everything. However, he waited in the palace for a long time and did not see Hong Zhuang come. Logically speaking, the matter should have been settled by then. Then he found out that Hong Zhuang had come to the resource hall. He happened to have nothing to do in the palace, so he came to the resource hall to look for Hong Zhuang. Noticing Di Beichen's slightly helpless gaze, Bailey Hong Zhuang immediately understood. She thought that Di Beichen had not seen her return, so he specially came to look for her. Greetings, young sect leader. Gong Shaoqing and the others bowed to Di Beichen. Before they became disciples of Tiangang's sect, Di Beichen was their friend. Now, they were already members of Tiangang's sect. When they saw Di Beichen, they naturally had a bow. Di Beichen nodded slightly and did not stop them. All the cultivators in Tiangang's sect called him that. If he stopped them, it would make things more difficult for them. Beichen, you said that the resources received by each branch hall's cultivators are different? Bailey Hongzhuang raised her eyebrows. She did not miss this news. Why would the cultivation resources of the 4 branch halls be different? That's right. There has always been competition between the 4 halls. Every year, there will be a competition between the 4 branch halls. The cultivation resources of each branch hall's disciples will be determined based on the results of this competition. Whichever branch hall's results are the best, they will receive the most abundant cultivation resources in the following year. Similarly, whichever branch hall's results are the worst, their disciples will receive the worst cultivation resources in the following year. You are new disciples, so the cultivation resources you receive are the same as other new disciples. After the next competition between the 4 branch palaces, your cultivation resources will be the same as the other disciples of the branch palaces. Di Beichen carefully told Bailey Hongzhuang and others about the matter. In Tiangang's sect, there was competition everywhere. After hearing Di Beichen's explanation, everyone had a look of realization. I didn't expect that the cultivation resources of the 4 branch palaces would be different. This is really surprising. Yuan Xiaoman's face was filled with amazement. It seems that in the future, when the 4 sub-palaces compete, we will have to give it our all. After all, this would affect their cultivation resources for the next year. If he was at the bottom of the 4 halls, it would not only be a humiliation, but his cultivation would also be quickly overtaken by others. This was something that no one wanted to see. Bailey Hongzhuang's eyes flashed with admiration and amazement. The sects from 1,000 years ago did not have so many methods. Now, after seeing the scenes of Tiangang's sect, she also felt that this method was more mature and had a greater stimulation for the disciples. In such an atmosphere, the disciples would not dare to slack off, even if they wanted to. They could only rush forward at full speed. So, the next time we meet, we will be competitors? Yuan Jixin's face was filled with a sunny and handsome smile. He really did not think that one day he might become the boss's opponent. Chapter 1814. Listening to Bailey Hongzhuang's words, everyone nodded. Although they belonged to different halls, they were all disciples of Tiangang's sect. Even if they became opponents in the future, it would just be a mutual exchange of pointers, and there would be no impact. In a few days, there will be other new disciples coming to the sect. They will also compete with you, so you have to work hard. Di Beichen's eyes were deep. Now that everyone was here, he naturally hoped that everyone could achieve good results. Don't worry, we will not be defeated by those guys. Bai Junyu's eyes flashed with a firm light. No matter who their future opponents were, they would not back down. Seeing that everyone was very confident, Di Beichen was also relieved. It's getting late, we'll go back first. Gong Shaoqing glanced at the surrounding situation and then said. Their group was standing not far from the door of the resource hall, and all the disciples coming and going were looking at them. What's more, there was also Di Beichun standing here. He knew very well that Di Beichun would never come here to explain things to them. He must have come to pick up Bailey Hongzhuang. It was extremely inappropriate for them to continue to disturb Bailey Hongzhuang and Di Beichun's relationship here. Listening to Gong Shaoqing's words, everyone nodded. Then let's go back. We'll meet again later. Yuan Jixin smiled. Everyone went to their respective halls. Xia Jiqing and Bai Junyu's eyes could not help but fall on Bailey Hongzhuang. Where was Hongzhuang going now? At this time, Di Beichun said, Junyu, Jiqing, you go back to the Vermilion Bird Hall first. As soon as these words came out, Xia Jiqing and Bai Junyu suddenly understood. Boss, then we'll go back first. Bailey Hongzhuang nodded slightly. Okay, you go back first. After everyone left, Bailey Hongzhuang looked at Di Beichun and asked, Did you come here to look for me? If I'm not here to look for you, do you think I'm here to collect cultivation resources from the resource hall? Di Beichun's voice was gentle and powerful. His eyes, which were as deep as the sea, were filled with love and tenderness. Bailey Hongzhuang raised her eyebrows and smiled. If you're here to receive cultivation resources, there's nothing strange about that. Seeing that Bailey Hongzhuang was deliberately joking, Di Beichun felt helpless. He immediately held Bailey Hongzhuang's small hand and walked forward. Suddenly being held by Di Beichun, Bailey Hongzhuang couldn't help but be stunned for a moment. Many disciples came and went outside the resource hall, and many people saw this scene. Di Beichun looked at Bailey Hongzhuang behind him. Looking at Bailey Hongzhuang's embarrassed look, he couldn't help but smile. What's wrong with me? Many people are watching. Then let them watch. Sooner or later, you'll be my wife, Di Beichun's wife. Just let everyone know. Di Beichun's lips were filled with a confident and dazzling smile. He held Bailey Hongzhuang's hand firmly, not allowing Bailey Hongzhuang to escape. Looking at the domineering appearance of the man in front of her, Bailey Hongzhuang's lips slowly raised a smile. She had to say that she was still happy in her heart. Bailey Hongzhuang was led by Di Beichun all the way to the direction of the palace. She said, Beichun, starting tomorrow, I'll cultivate in the Vermilion Bird Hall. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.